Woodson Martin, CEO of OutSystems. Welcome to AI to Peace.
Thank you, Jeremy.
The first question I want to ask you, Woodson, it's always a pleasure clearly speaking to you. I thought your speech the other day to all of your partners around the world was inspirational. And you've been at the forefront of innovation and leadership in the technology space for many years now. Could you start by telling us about your journey to this point and how your perspective has evolved on the role technology and now AI is playing in shaping society and ultimately peace?
Thanks. Well, Jeremy, it's been a long career. I think back to the 90s when I really got started in tech and everything was about optimizing for speed and breakthroughs. How do we move faster, innovate harder? That was right for that moment. But now, decades later, I see something pretty different. We're not just building tools anymore. We're shaping systems that shape how people work, how we think, certainly how we connect. And that's a different responsibility entirely. I've watched societies become more fractured, more polarized. I think we all see this. Technology was supposed to connect us, and in many ways it has. But it's also kind of amplified a lot of the divisions. And so when I think about peace now, I'm thinking about it practically, not as some kind of abstract idea, but as the foundation that has to be in place if any of our innovation is really going to matter.
Thank you, Woodson. Okay, OutSystems has been supporting Peace One Day nearly 7 years now, which is extraordinary, and a huge thank you to you and all of your team. What is it about this work and the idea of Peace Day that resonates so strongly with you and with the OutSystems as an organization? And more broadly, how do you see the role of companies like yours supporting initiatives that aim to create a more peaceful and sustainable world?
Jeremy, I'd say, I think your genius and the genius of Peace One Day is that you understood something kind of fundamental, and that peace isn't really a soft concept. It requires systems, right? It requires coordination at scale. People, organizations, nations aligning around something bigger than themselves. And, without getting too bold, let me just say that that's exactly the kind of work that we do at OutSystems. We build infrastructure that lets complex organizations align and move together. So when we started supporting Peace One Day, I think 7 years ago, it was obvious that we were supporting a mission that needed exactly what we build. And so, here's what I believe. Every company operates in the real world. We can all benefit from stability, from trust, from functioning societies, right? So it's not really altruistic for us to support peace initiatives. It's kind of what they call enlightened self-interest, right? Like, we have a role to play, and for OutSystems specifically, that role is clear. We build the technology that makes organizations more transparent, more aligned, more trustworthy. And what Peace One Day does is kind of brilliantly taking something that feels enormous and impossible, let's build global peace, and make it very concrete. A day, a framework, points of alignment. That's systems thinking. And that's what can change the world.
Wow, Woodson, that's amazing to hear you say that. And thank you, as I said, for all of that support for many, many years. You've also supported today AI to Peace, helping enable this global conversation. And I really want to thank you because it just wouldn't have happened without you. So thank you, Woodson. From your perspective, why is the conversation around AI so important right now, particularly in relation to the future of peace and sustainability in our world?
Well, thanks, Jeremy. Let me just also say thank you to you. Right? I think your leadership here has been incredible, and I love your insight around tackling AI to peace at this moment. AI has kind of fundamentally changed what technology means. It's not a tool you use and put down anymore, right? It's becoming agentic, making decisions, creating content, shaping outcomes. It's a kind of a watershed moment because now the questions aren't just, is this technology innovative? They're who controls it? What are the values of this technology? What happens when it makes a mistake? Those are, peace questions. They're about trust and control and alignment. And I think we're in a window right now where we can still shape how AI develops and deploys. In 5 years or 10 years, the trajectory will be harder to change. And I think you understand this. And that's why AI to peace matters right now. It's not premature, like it's precisely timed. I am genuinely optimistic about the potential of AI. But optimism without, intentionality is just hope. And we need to be deliberate about the direction.
I completely agree. No AI policy, no peace. From where you sit, what concerns you most about the risk AI presents, especially when we think about misinformation, polarization, and the potential for increased instability or conflict?
I think AI is fundamentally an accelerator. I'm positive on AI. I want to start there. Anytime I talk about the risks of AI, I want to start with the idea that I'm actually quite bullish. It accelerates human capability, but it also accelerates human mistakes and human biases, right? So the risks are real. Misinformation at scale, deep fakes that can erode trust, polarization that's faster, more targeted than we've ever seen. And so, the potential for instability is really significant. But here's what I think often gets missed. These risks are not inevitable. They're the results of choices. Choices about how we build, who we consult, what guardrails we put in place. So when I look at risk like AI-enabled misinformation, I don't see a reason to abandon AI. I see a design problem. How do we build systems where transparency, traceability are built in from the start? The one thing that really can't be negotiable, humans have to remain in control of the consequential decisions. Not like in a theoretical sense, but in practice. Like every system we deploy has to be auditable. Every decision has to be explainable. And I think that's not optional.
Thank you, Woodson. Let's dig a little deeper on that. It's fascinating listening to you talk about these issues. It is though. There's a growing sense that without meaningful global cooperation and policy, AI could deepen divisions rather than help resolve them. You've been speaking a little bit about that, right? So how do you see the role of policy? I'm most interested in this aspect. In terms of policy evolving in the space, and do you feel we're moving quickly enough to safeguard people?
Yeah, we're not moving quickly enough now. Policy absolutely has to evolve. Global alignment on principles matters, but, here's the reality, right? Policy sets direction, but companies implement AI in the world, right? AI is being deployed inside organizations, right? Not really by governments. So while we need stronger global frameworks, the companies working in AI today, right, have to get serious about governance ourselves, not just waiting for regulators to force us to. And this is where I think the OutSystems approach matters. We're not bolting on ethics or governance as an afterthought. We're building these things into the platform itself. Transparency, auditability, control. These aren't things we can just tape on later. They're architectural. And there's a business case for all of this too, right? It's not just altruism. Organizations trust platforms that are trustworthy, right? They adopt technology that doesn't put them or their business or their customers at risk. So responsible AI isn't just the right thing to do, it's smarter business.
Accountability, trust, building it from the very beginning in such a way not only to protect people, but as you say, is good for business. It's just wonderful to hear. And well done you for doing it that way. So AI is now capable of distorting reality at scale. We're seeing it. We're seeing it with the present wars. We know what's happening. How do we protect truth and maintain trust in a world where the line between what is real and what is fabricated is becoming increasingly difficult to see?
Well, I mean, I agree with you that we're in a moment where reality itself is under pressure. AI can now create text, images, video that are nearly indistinguishable, certainly by the common eye, indistinguishable from the authentic. And this is, of course, genuinely concerning, and there are real problems spawning from this in the world today because peace depends on a shared truth. Conflict thrives in information chaos, right? And we know how to solve this. We win by showing our sources, right? By explaining decisions, by making every system auditable. When AI makes a recommendation or creates content, we need to see the reasoning, open the black box. We need to know what data it was trained on. We need to be able to trace it back. This is where enterprise platforms matter enormously. They're built for this kind of governance and transparency. I think about institutions, hospitals, governments, large companies that can't deploy the AI they can't understand or explain. They need systems that let them see inside the black box. And that's not limiting innovation, right? That's enabling responsible innovation at scale. That's how I think about it.
That makes perfect sense, Woodson. It is, in fact, what you were speaking about earlier. OutSystems, being able to see inside the black box. That's the point that you were making. If I can see inside that black box and I know about the AI I'm using, I'm more likely to use it. I mean,
trust it.
You trust
right?
it. Yeah. And it's all about trust at this particular point, as you say. So look, on the other side of this, this whole conversation is fascinating, but there is clearly, as you've described, enormous potential. What excites you most about AI's ability to contribute to a more peaceful and sustainable world? And where are you already seeing the potential being realized? And I know that OutSystems is doing many things with AI in relation to making a difference. But tell me, what's really exciting you? What are you seeing?
So we talk a lot about the risks, but on the flip side, AI can dramatically reduce friction between people and systems, right? Faster access to services, better coordination in crises, breaking down institutional silos that prevent cooperation or collaboration. All of that is peaceful in a real sense. Peace isn't just the absence of conflict. It's the presence of functioning systems where people can get what they need, right? And I don't know, we saw this at the beginning of the Ukraine crisis, right? Volunteers built a platform on OutSystems that connected Ukrainian refugees with people offering help. Refugees could ask for the basic things they need: shelter, food, clothing, and the app would match their needs with available support. No bureaucracy, no friction, just human need meeting human capacity to help. And that's, I think, really AI's potential. Coordination at the moment, it matters most. I imagine AI helping predict and prevent conflict, helping coordinate humanitarian response, helping break down language barriers between communities, helping allocate resources more fairly. And that's kind of where my optimism comes from. Not from technology solving everything, but from technology and being a powerful amplifier of human cooperation.
Very interesting. And of course, we have Peace Day coming. And as you know, for the last 27 years, we've been trying to institutionalize that day. We think 3 billion people now are aware, as you know, Woodson, and a big decrease in violence because of that behavioral change. What I know you and I will talk about in the future is how technology, how AI can amplify that behavioral change and decrease violence in our homes, schools, communities, and places of work. I have to say, as somebody who's been a global campaigner for a long time, technology and AI definitely can be utilized for good. There's no question about that. And I'll look forward to learning more about that from you in the future. So let's talk about technology as an accelerator. What responsibility do leaders, companies, and individuals carry in relation to shaping its direction? And ultimately, what gives you confidence that we can guide AI in a way that genuinely benefits humanity?
I believe leaders in companies, for sure, in government, in institutions, have to make choices that prioritize long-term stability over just purely short-term gains. That means sometimes saying no. No to deploying what you can't govern. No to moving faster than your ability to understand the consequences. And that's really hard in a competitive industry. But it's essential. I think it's essential to human survival, much less to peace. And I guess what gives me hope is this. Humans are getting smarter about AI. We're asking the harder questions. We're not just blindly optimistic anymore. And people, when they understand the stakes, want to do the right thing. They want systems that behave well. We want to trust the technology we're using. And that instinct toward responsibility, I think, is very powerful. If we lean into it, we can shape this technology in a way that genuinely benefits humanity. And I think that's the obligation of leaders across all sectors of society. This moment with you and Peace One Day, AI to Peace, it's not anomalous. This is part of a larger movement toward responsible innovation. And this gives me a lot of confidence.
Thank you, Woodson. And thank you for your leadership and courage in relation to wanting to see these kinds of outcomes become a reality. As I said, I'm immensely grateful for your support. So finally, for anyone watching this today, individuals, organizations, young people around the world, what would you encourage them to do right now to help ensure that AI becomes a force for good?
Let's break it down into a couple of categories. For individuals, be critical of what you consume. Don't assume everything you see online is real. Ask questions. Demand transparency from the platforms, from the companies, from the services you use. That kind of skepticism is healthy. And then I'd say to companies, executives, leaders, don't deploy what you can't govern, right? Full stop. I know the pressure to move fast is enormous, but the cost of moving fast without understanding the consequences is too high. Build governance, right, into your systems from day one. It's harder up front, but it's the only way this can work at scale. And then to leaders everywhere. Prioritize trust over speed. It feels counterintuitive in a technology industry, but trust is your real competitive advantage. And it only comes from consistent, transparent, responsible action over time. I guess maybe my closing thought then on all of this is that your vision for Peace One Day is radical in its simplicity. What if we aligned globally around something better than conflict? That's not naive, right? That's visionary. And it requires the same thing that AI requires. Clear intention, good governance, human control. We can do this, but only if we choose to.
Woodson Martin, the CEO of OutSystems, thank you for supporting Peace One Day, and thank you for making AI to Peace a reality.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Melissa Fleming, Undersecretary General for Global Communications. Welcome to AI to Peace.
Thank you so much, Jeremy.
So, Melissa, you've been at the forefront of global communications and crisis response at the United Nations. Could you share a little bit about your journey and how your perspective has evolved around the role of AI in shaping peace and security?
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Yeah, well, indeed, my career trajectory has brought me on the front lines of war zones, but also refugee camps, seeing firsthand the effect of wars and the UN response to millions of people who are suffering from the impacts of wars. So the communications part has been my role, and how we communicate about these crises. How do we deploy communications to foster peace, and mediation as an alternative to bombs? We work in communications environments that are very often weaponized in the context of war. In information narrative battles of the narrative, and this has been supercharged now in the advent of AI. We were already struggling in the digital environment with mis and disinformation, and AI-powered algorithms that could make certain disinformation narratives worse. But now we're struggling in an environment where we have AI deepfakes and a whole number of different challenges. That said, you asked me the question, how can AI be deployed for peace? And that is another hope that we have. So maybe we can get into that a little bit.
Thank you, Melissa. I want to ask, from your vantage point at the UN, what concerns you most about the risks AI presents, particularly in relation to disinformation, polarization, and the potential escalation of conflict?
Yes, of course, the whole UN is grappling with the risks of AI, and looking at the whole spectrum of potential harms and working to head these off, and at the same time exploring and exploiting the huge benefits of AI and attempting to equalize these benefits across its members so that everyone can benefit and everybody can be protected from its harms. Where we're concerned from my department, leading the Department for Global Communications, is in the information space. We are already struggling with an information ecosystem that is toxic. And with the growth of AI, we're seeing some of the same dangers, but just amplified. That is, for example, in the area of young people spending their time online, now increasingly with AI companions who are replacing human health and often leading them into very dark places and providing advice that is highly dangerous. So we really believe we need guardrails to protect our young people. We're also extremely worried about how this is affecting the information space, the quality of information, the access to trusted information, which is a human right. We are, concerned that people are starting to no longer trust anything that they read or see online, and we are calling on AI companies to ensure that credible sources are the main basis for their summaries, for their especially on consequential issues of our time, like climate change. And then we're especially concerned about the fog of war. I mean, right now we have a third of humanity lives in conflict zones, and we're seeing information wars happening within actual wars, and AI being weaponized to make things worse, not only for public understanding on what is actually happening, the deployment of AI deepfakes, but also to undermine the humanity of the other. So we're really calling for a global wake-up call. We're at the advent of perhaps a tipping point. There's virtually no regulation of AI, and yet it's speeding forward at a record pace. And so the UN is working on with an international advisory panel on ways to lay the foundation so that there could be some kind of governance.
So no AI policy, no peace. There's a growing sense that without meaningful global policy and cooperation, AI could deepen instability rather than reduce it. How do you see the role of international policy evolving? And do you believe we're moving quickly enough to safeguard peace?
Well, there have been some studies that show that AI can be deployed usefully on behalf of peace processes. For example, if you're in a peace process, you could include more of the population using AI surveys to get an understanding of where people are coming from. AI can also be deployed in conflict prevention to actually identify risk factors to conflict and perhaps stop them before they even start. And AI is also being deployed in humanitarian action in ways that could be helpful as we are suffering from huge budget cuts. So we are trying to look at how AI can make us more effective, how we could make involve more people in heading off wars and using it in effective ways. But at the same time, we really have to be realistic about the risks, and that's why the AI panel that the Secretary General of the UN appointed, a 40-person panel that represents the best minds of AI from across the world, is meeting and is working on a report that it is going to present before the AI for Good summit that happens every year at the ITU in Geneva, at an international meeting that will be held there, to really provide a blueprint for how there could be a global governance system for AI. And to take the leadership back from a few individual companies that right now are in total control.
Thank you, Melissa. So AI is increasingly capable of distorting reality at scale, which we know. In conflict situations especially, how can we protect truth and maintain trust in information when the line between real and fabricated content is becoming harder to detect?
Well, Jeremy, I think that's one of the biggest challenges of our time. I mean, more and more people are relying on social media and digital searches for their information, and yet these are the most untrustworthy spaces, as we know, for accurate information. And so hopefully we'll see more individuals making a decision once they realize that there's hardly anything that they can trust online, or that they really don't know what to trust. And we're hearing that more and more from surveys, that they will turn back to reliable sources, credible sources of information. We see the UN website as one and UN News as one, but of course news organizations that really have trained journalists who are painstakingly doing the reporting and the research and the interviews that would give people an accurate picture of what is happening. And at the same time, we need to invest in independent media and independent journalism, and support them in ways that are not just financial, but just through our subscriptions and through our own attention. So let's turn back to the sources of credible information and away from the places where we know that sometimes it's just people having fun, but more often than not, it's people deliberately trying to deceive us online. And so we have to get better than that.
So on the other side of all of this, well, of course, there is enormous potential. So what excites you about AI's ability to contribute to a more peaceful and sustainable world? And where are you already seeing that impact?
Well, there is a lot of excitement at the UN, and it is in the areas, for example, of health. There's so many places in the world where people are unable to access what we can access in Western countries, what we take for granted. And the ability for people in far-off remote places to access the knowledge, the advice that medical professionals can provide without having enormous resources. That is one area. In our weather systems, to be able to provide early warning of impending weather and climate disasters to protect people, that's another area. And just spreading knowledge when it is done right, people will have the ability to access knowledge in ways that they haven't before. And I just think of some kids in war zones and refugee camps who beg for education and haven't been able to access it up to now. I do think AI could provide that possibility, and we are actively exploring across the UN on how to use AI to help accelerate and just include more children in education that we just take for granted in richer countries in the world.
Thank you, Melissa. So finally, what role do individuals and organizations, leaders all have to play in shaping AI so it serves humanity positively? And how can each of us contribute to ensuring it becomes a force for peace rather than division?
Well, I think that we all need to, to say we are pro-technology. Technology, where it is deployed to help humanity and to serve our planet. But we're also pro-human. And we need to make sure that we have the guardrails and that we have the control so that we can deploy AI for humanity's benefit. And not be taken over by it and by its risks.
Thank you, Melissa. I want to end with your podcast, What Keeps You Up at Night. Tell us a little bit about that.
This is a podcast that I've been running for over 8 years, and it is designed to bring listeners into the UN in a way that they don't usually learn about the UN, and that is through its incredible, remarkable people who work here. I choose my interview partners mostly through conversations I have with them in meetings or encounters, and I realize they have incredible life stories and that they've really dedicated their lives in the service of humanity, and that people deserve to know their life stories. And, by having these kinds of personal conversations with them on what drives them, what motivates them, and what do they get out of this sacrifice and service, that also provides a bridge of relatability into listeners who don't know much about the UN and want to get inspired by the kind of work that we do in the service of people and planet.
Yeah, what keeps you up at night? What a great title for a podcast.
Well, this is a question I always ask in the middle of the podcast because, of course, people working for the UN are really at the front lines of a lot of crises. They're faced with immense human suffering, and they're constantly grappling with how can I do better? How can I help? And so that question is, because I know all of them are awake at night very often thinking, how can I help people more? How can I deliver better? And the answers are always quite revealing.
Melissa, you don't know I'm going to ask you this, but you have to tell the audience about the book. I mean, your experience around refugees and at the United Nations is absolutely incredible. Before you go, please tell us about the book.
Well, I lead communications at the UN, which means we communicate a lot of statistics and numbers, the statistics of human suffering, the data of economic inequalities. And what I've learned through behavioral science is that the more who die, the less we care. And that statistics are human beings with the tears dried off. And that the way to really get people to pay attention but also open their hearts is to tell individual stories. And so Proof of Concept was a book I wrote about Doa Al-Zamel, a Syrian refugee who survived one of the worst shipwrecks in the Mediterranean Sea as she was trying to reach safety and a better life in Europe with her fiancé. And when she was rescued after 4 days and 4 nights in the Mediterranean Sea, 500 of her fellow passengers had drowned before her eyes, including the love of her life. She was clutching 2 babies, not her own, who'd been entrusted to her by dying relatives. And she managed to save one of them, Masa, little baby Masa, and herself. And that's why it's called A Hope More Powerful Than the Sea. Through her story, you learn about the horrors of the Syrian civil war, what forced millions of Syrians to flee their homes, why refugees take these dangerous decisions to cross the Mediterranean Sea in search of hope, and the incredible resilience and humanity in every single one of them through one story.
Melissa Fleming, you're an absolute inspiration. You've been incredibly supportive to Peace One Day. Thank you for participating in AI to Peace. We wish you and your colleagues at the United Nations the very best with your incredible work.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, and all the best to you. And thank you for your relentless pursuit of peace through your advocacy and your determination. I really appreciate it.
Bye-bye, Melissa.
Thank you.
Daniel Hume, welcome to AI to Peace.
Good to see you, Jeremy.
The first thing I want to ask you, Daniel, is you've been at the forefront of AI development and innovation. Could you share a little bit about your journey and how your perspective has evolved on the role AI might play in shaping society and ultimately peace?
It's a big question, but yeah, I've been involved in AI for about 27 years. My undergraduate was in AI at UCL, just down the road here. There was 2 people on my course. Things have changed a lot since then. My undergraduate, my PhD, masters are all in AI. I ran a master's program in applied AI at UCL, and currently I'm entrepreneur in residence for UCL and a number of universities, helping them understand how to spin out deep technology. I started a company about 20 years ago that's been building AI solutions for some of the biggest companies in the world. I sold that to WPP, the biggest marketing company in the world, where I now run AI across about 120,000 people. And WPP give me a huge amount of freedom. I get to invest in companies now, and I've just started a number of companies to, one, solve machine consciousness, and the other one, I think there's going to be an impending challenge around people building relationships with machines over the coming years and how we can navigate some of those complexities. So I'm deeply interested in how AI, these technologies, will impact humanity, and I want to make sure that we impact humanity in a positive way.
Amazing, Daniel. Incredible work that you're doing. Very, very interesting. And thank you again for participating today. I want to ask you now, from your vantage point, what concerns you most about the risks AI presents, particularly in relation to misinformation, polarization, and the potential for instability and indeed conflict?
Yeah, actually, maybe 10 years ago, I started to put together an idea that we have not just one singularity that we're facing as a species. And singularity, it comes from the word physics. It is a point in time that we can't see beyond. And it's often referred to as the technological singularity, which is the point in time where we build a machine 1,000,000 times smarter than us. I actually think there's about 7 singularities, 7 points in time that AI is accelerating accelerating us towards that we can't see beyond. Just very, very quickly, those are things like actually curing death. What will society look like when we realize there are people amongst us that won't have to die? What happens if we do build a machine 1,000,000 times smarter than us? What happens if we continue to accelerate consumption without dealing with the environmental challenges that brings? What happens if we create a post-truth world? What happens if surveillance becomes ubiquitous and AI is better and better understanding people, but also influencing people? What happens actually if we build machines that actually can feel suffering and pain, and what sort of moral imperative do we have over those things? So I'm interested in a whole plethora of potential impacts that these technologies will have. I'm primarily concerned about its impact on jobs, its impact on creating a post-truth world. And being in the marketing industry, we're thinking very carefully, of course, about how to make sure that we're using these technologies to influence people both in a safe and responsible way, but we also need to prevent bad actors from using these technologies to influence people that allows them to accumulate more wealth and more power.
Incredible, Daniel. You're right at the coalface of massive issues that humanity is facing, and there's this growing sense that without meaningful policy and cooperation, this little phrase, no policy, no peace. This is a really fundamentally important issue that humanity is about to confront. AI deepening the instability rather than reducing it if there's no policy. So how do you see the role of policy evolving? And do you feel we're moving quickly enough to safeguard the people of our planet?
So I guess, we know that misinformation bots, deepfakes, have challenged our political foundations over the past, 10 years, and they continue to challenge our political foundations. But they're also now challenging the fabric of our reality. With, a few dollars, I can clone you. And I know people who are being cloned, and their clones are being used to commit fraud. This idea of social engineering is going to become a big issue in the future, not just for businesses, but also for individuals, where their children, their partners are being cloned, and those clones are being used to commit fraud. So what I've been heartened by is two things. One is organizations, despite having policies and regulations in place, have been thinking very carefully about making sure that they do the right thing with these technologies. So, the individuals that I know across many organizations, they do think about the potential impact that these technologies have on society. That said, the capitalistic model to increase profits, reduce costs, means that sometimes collectively bad decisions are made that are bad for humans, bad for animals, bad for the environment. And so regulation is needed to think about what those risks are and how to mitigate them. But what I think will happen actually over the coming years, instead of there being mass catastrophic risks associated with AI, there's going to be lots of things that go wrong. People are going to be deploying AI across their organizations. Those AIs are not going to work. They're not fit for purpose. They'll cause harm. And then what I think will happen is that regulation will catch up and start putting the right policies around ensuring that we're using these technologies effectively. So I was worried about us creating mass catastrophic risk from AI, but I think what will happen is it will happen incrementally, and then hopefully policy regulation will catch up. The other thing that I've been heartened about is there is a worry that AI, these algorithms tend to polarize people. They tend to tell people what they want to hear to satisfy their own biases. But actually, ironically, in a world where people don't know what is true, can't believe what they're looking at, what I've started to observe is actually people challenging their own beliefs. Rather than just looking at something and accepting that it's true, they actually ask themselves, is this actually something is AI generated, or is it created by a bad actor somewhere else? So there is this sort of ironic, counterintuitive, emergent behavior, which is, in a post-truth world, people might be more rigorous around understanding what is actually being presented to them.
It's very interesting, Lee. AI is increasingly capable of distorting reality at scale, as you've just pointed out, and we're seeing it with the wars that are happening at the moment. How do we protect truth and maintain trust? I think it was quite lovely then that you talked about that idea that people are questioning, because of course that's a layer within itself that is all about protection. And that's actually quite interesting, because it means that we're looking at everything at a deeper level. So I very much take on board what you've said. But when the line between real, and not real can be fabricated so well, how do we detect it? How do we protect it?
I think there's two ways. One is we need to have better mechanisms to surface what might be misinformation, what might be, bias, what might be adverse actors. And ironically, we can actually use AI to do this. And ironically, you can use bias towards your advantage. What you can do is you can build personas that represent various different communities, minority groups, political parties, newspapers, even legal frameworks like ad claims and sustainability claims. And by creating these individual representations using AI, we can then look at content and assess how much damage or harm that content might have. Historically, what would happen is that people would put content out there and then it would be moderated and brought back in once the damage has been done. Because having humans moderate content is slow, it's bureaucratic. What we can actually start to do is we can start to use AI to test the risk associated with content very rapidly. And then what's going to happen over the coming years, AI is going to be much better at determining whether that content is true or not. At the moment, AI, I argue, is a bit like an intoxicated graduate. It is, though, graduating to like a master's level, and soon we might have a PhD level type of AI where it can actually apply the scientific method. So where it might have identified a potential risk in some content, it could apply a scientific method to determine whether that's actually true or false, or whether it comes from a good actor or a bad actor. So we can actually use AI to make sure that the content that we're putting out there is actually safer. But on the flip side of that, even if I communicate to people that this AI comes from an authentic source, that the claims are credible, if people still don't believe that, if they still believe that it's deep faked, then we have a problem. So how do we then educate people and get people to actually trust the mechanisms that we're using to be able to determine whether content is true or not? And I think that comes through education and initiatives like this.
Okay, so incredible to listen to you. Your knowledge is, second to none, and thank you for sharing all of the information that you are. On the other side of this, there is obviously enormous positive potential, Daniel, clearly. What excites you most about AI's ability to contribute to a more peaceful and sustainable world, and where are you already seeing that in action?
Well, those handful of singularities that I've mentioned to you, whether it be creating a post-truth world or solving our environmental problems, the point is that beyond each one of those things could be a very negative world or a very positive world. And I'm interested in investing in initiatives to make sure that we're steering towards the positive outcome. I do actually think that we can use AI, ironically, to help us navigate these challenges. I did start a company a few years ago to solve machine consciousness. And the hypothesis, and this is going to sound crazy, the hypothesis is that by building a machine that understands pain and suffering and love and empathy, building a machine that can appreciate the value of other things that are conscious in the way that we appreciate the value of other things that are conscious, maybe it can help us navigate some of these complexities over the next decade that we're facing in a more effective way. So I'm not relying necessarily wholly on AI to do that. But what's also interesting is that when you speak to people who have become economically free, they maybe sold a company or whatever, most of the sane people that I know, the people that don't want to have gold-plated Lamborghinis, as far as I'm concerned, if you want a gold-plated Lamborghini, you also need a therapist. But most of the sane people I know, they're not using their wealth and assets to accumulate more wealth and more power. They're trying to use their assets to contribute positively to humanity. So I hope that we create what is called a protopia. A protopia is a system that is incrementally getting better, a system where we're using innovations to free people from economic constraints by giving them access to goods like food and healthcare, energy, transport more cheaply. So by bringing the cost of goods down, by automating them, you can give people more access to those goods more cheaply, freeing them people from economic constraints, giving them access to these technologies to build innovations that free more people from economic constraints. Ironically, this capitalistic model to reduce costs, to increase abundance, could actually drive us towards a very positive world, which is a world of abundance, freeing people to contribute to humanity however they want.
Amazing, Daniel. So look, lastly, as this technology accelerates, what responsibility do leaders, companies, and individuals carry in shaping the kind of examples that you've just given? And what gives you hope that we can guide AI in a direction that genuinely benefits humanity?
Well, I think what's also heartening is that people have now started to recognise the true power of AI. Of course, there's lots of rhetoric around AI being a bubble and things like that. I'm very happy to address that concept. But the reality is that this is the most incredible technology that we have ever created. It's only going to get smarter. It's only going to get more impactful. And the more that people educate themselves, the better we're going to navigate these challenges, both as the individuals and leaders and policymakers. My worry is that, for most people, AI started 3 years ago, and there's many people that now have rebranded themselves as AI experts. Even arguably, if you entered the field 15 years ago, you're still very much an infant in understanding about how these technologies will impact humanity. And what I worry about is the noise created by the technology consultants out there, the people that think that they know about AI, or trying to convince other people that know about AI, focusing on the wrong things. So my advice to people is find deep domain experts, people that really do deeply understand these technologies, and make sure that you're using them to navigate these complexities.
Daniel, thank you so much for participating today. If people want to find out more about your work, how do they do that?
They can go to hulme.ai, hulme.ai, and there's plenty of information there about how they can reach me.
Listen, Daniel, good luck on your journey. No policy, no peace. Do all you can, man. We need you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Gabriela Ramos, architect of the UNESCO's global standard on the ethics of AI. Welcome to #AI to Peace.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Jeremy.
So you've held, Gabriela, some of the most influential positions shaping global policy, including your leadership at UNESCO. Could you share a little bit about your journey and how your perspective has evolved on the role AI might play in shaping societies and ultimately peace?
Well, I have been, as you say, honored and lucky to be shaping these global standards. Not only at UNESCO, where I was the Assistant Director General of Social and Human Sciences, but also at the OECD, where I was the Sherpa to the G20, and the OECD is also a standard setter institution internationally. And what I can tell you is that it's an amazing opportunity to bring countries together to develop these tools, because then you need to agree on the substance, and then to get them to sign them off, to approve them. And more importantly, in my work, I have always focused on ensuring good implementation. For the recommendation on the ethics of AI, we already had many policies and standards and principles, including the G20 principles in Osaka that were approved in 2019. So it was very important not only to focus on the what, but also on the how. The what is pretty straightforward. I think that we know the narrative. AI should be contributing to human rights, to human dignity. AI should be transparent, should be accountable. I mean, these things are very nice to say, not very easy to deliver because of all the way in which AI has been developed. But at the end, it was very important for me to help countries look where they stand in terms of the AI developments, the tools, the markets, the frameworks, and then how they could position themselves better, not only to govern it right and to align it with these human rights frameworks, but also to benefit from it. Because what we're seeing is that with the high concentration of financial capital, with skills, with infrastructure in few countries, the danger is that this amazing technology will not be able to support countries that are in the lower level of development, and also to address the many big challenges that we are confronting. So not to focus on the technology, but to focus on how the technology can help us achieve more inclusive societies, improve education, reach out to places where it's so difficult, improve health outcomes. I mean, all of these things were embedded in the recommendation, and it was signed by 193 countries, and then the US joined. So it was actually the I would say, the only real universal standard globally.
Incredible work. What concerns you most about the risks AI presents, particularly, I guess, in relation to misinformation, polarization, and the potential for instability or conflict?
Well, the issue with artificial intelligence is that it's a technology, I mean, it's just resembling human cognitive functions, no? Because we go into analyzing data and doing predictions, and now we're going to reasoning, and now you have agentic AI where developments can help you perform tasks autonomously. So what we're seeing is that these technologies are really pervasive. It's not only one sector they are affecting every single strand of our life, but they're also very, very, very fast. And therefore, the big question here is, how do we prepare better, not only to take advantage of the developments as they are delivered to us by the market players, but also to ensure that the governance of AI prevents the downsides. And I feel that this narrative whereby innovation needs to be free from regulation and free from policy limits and is just a fallacy, because AI is just another sector, and like any other sector, like pharmaceutical, like automobile, they all need to have rules and safety tests and inclusiveness tests to make sure that they reach the market with sound elements already there. And what is happening is that now we have this mantra, and we have big tech and the big companies that are just pushing for no regulation or for very light touch or voluntary principles. And I think that's a problem. That's a problem because then you can have very clear downsides. You mentioned one of them, which can be misinformation at scale. The way the digital platforms for social network issues or connections are being built with the attention economy. The more you are connected, the more they can increase their earnings because they have their sponsors and their publicity and all of that. But this is not putting the person at the center of the design of the systems, and this is what just brought to bear last week when the judges in the U.S. declare that the design of the social platforms was addictive. And therefore, it really was a landmark decision because it's the way these things are developed. It's not that it's great to be connected. It's not that it's great to be informed. It's not that they can be an amazing liberating force for the freedom of speech. But the way they have been put into the markets have these very difficult consequences. You have other worries related to misuse, because now the AI is also based on open source. Not everybody, because the big tech, OpenAI, Anthropic, and many others are proprietary in terms of their developments. But there are many models that are already in the open space, which is great because it has allowed also many countries and people to use them and develop smaller models that can help them address their issues. But on the other hand, you can also misuse them for very different purposes, for cyber attacks, for all these things that have gone very high. The question of inclusiveness and the impact on the labor market. We know that it's not that jobs are going to disappear. I will tell you, maybe some jobs will disappear. What is happening is that all jobs are being transformed. And therefore, all jobs need to integrate AI to transform the way they operate. Think about the engineers, think about the architects, think about your own job. It's really being transformed with the inception of AI. And I don't feel that we are really supporting workers for the transition or protecting those that are really at the bottom of the labor markets. The question of gender, women are underrepresented in the data, are underrepresented in the developments. 90% of the models are being developed mostly by white male only, and that conveys, of course, this concentration at the top delivers discrimination at the bottom, and therefore women voices are not there. But on the other hand, cyber attacks, pornography online, deep fakes, all of these things affect principally women. So all of these things need to be corrected. But it's not that the technologies are bad. The question is, how do we develop the policy frameworks, the rules of the game, and the liability regimes, as we do with everything that works in our economies, to ensure that whenever they go wrong, they can be pursued and they can have compensation mechanisms, therefore establishing a better framework for them to operate.
Absolutely fascinating. So this phrase, no AI policy, no peace. Similarly, no climate action, no peace. No food, no peace. Would it ring true for you? Clearly, I guess it does. No AI policy, no peace.
Just look at the wars that we are now confronting. The use of drones, the use of AI to target sites, the use of AI to kill. I mean, it's very dangerous. And therefore, as with many other areas of our legal frameworks, we need to extend the laws that we have given ourselves for peace and for war, because there are also laws on war and things that you cannot do, to protect civilians, to ensure that everything is proportionate, to ensure that you are accountable. All of these things need to be extended to the use of AI in conflict and in war. And therefore, I think this is like the most important element regarding peace. When we negotiated a recommendation on the ethics of AI, there was a very, very strong discussion, robust discussion among member states regarding how would they ensure that there was human determination of using AI whenever there was life and death issues concerning those issues. And of course, there was the whole majority of member states that agreed that it should be decided by humans always, and humans should be accountable for whatever AI does in those cases. Could be a health issue, that the doctor use AI to do a surgery or to do an intervention, and that goes wrong. It's not that the AI is going to be responsible, it's the doctor that use it. It should be the same with the military. Whatever goes wrong is not because you have an autonomous system that is doing lethal things. You need to have this responsibility, and it's very important. But then the other part, I feel that there is a very promising side of AI in bringing peace together, because at the end, it connects us all. It gives us windows of learning from other cultures. It allows us to be reading and access to information when it's of good quality, that is just massive and very good. It allows also for young people to start their own startups and opening the room also for people to fulfill their full potential. So I feel it's also not only controlling the downsides, because that's like the most difficult, not the most, it's the most basic part. You control the downsides. That's very basic. What is very important is how do we use it to build more understanding among countries and among people. And I think that's a very important element to advance.
Gabriela, AI is increasingly capable also of distorting reality at scale. In your view, how do we protect truth and maintain trust when the line between real and fabricated content is becoming harder to detect?
I feel that the key word there is accountability. And to tell you the truth, Jeremy, again, going back to laws and regulations, why is the information ecosystem so problematic? Why is it that we can just inundate the digital space with lies, and nobody will do anything. I mean, there are systems that are tracking those things. There are some rules, but at the end, one of the blockage that I feel we need to overcome is the fact that the U.S. has this Decency Act, whereby they cut the accountability from the digital platforms from their content they publish. And of course, this can be linked also to freedom of speech, and I don't want to downplay the importance of keeping freedom of speech, but I think sometimes it can be abused in the sense that nobody can stop people when they inundate with lies or when they go for hate speech, which is also massive in the digital space. And I feel we need to make the platforms accountable for the content, as we always did with the newspapers. The newspapers editors were in charge of ensuring that anything that was going to be published in their newspaper had a basis. You were not obliged to disclose your sources, but you were obliged to have solid sources of information. And you were also bound to the fact that if the information you are publicizing is wrong, you could be liable. And there were mechanisms to defamation, to many things that could be used in the analog world. So I feel that we need again to transform those frameworks that we already have in the media space in general to the digital world, because at the end, market actors respond to incentives and respond to rules. But if there are no rules and you can publish no matter what, and you will not have no consequences, and there is no accountability and no responsibility, then you risk confronting what we see many times, all these deep fakes, all of these impersonations, all of these plain lies and lack of real facts. But we need to fix it, and we know how to fix it. We have the tools to fix it, because it's not the very first time, Jeremy, that we and your organization and yourself, you have been for so many years working on these issues. You didn't start working on AI, on peace with AI. You started long ago, and therefore these things are issues that we have been grappling with for so many years. The propaganda that fascist governments inundated people with, curtailing information that was not supporting their own views of the world. All of these things we have experienced. You remember that in the Nazi Germany, there were dropping a lot of flyers with information that was false, and therefore I feel it's not that we are facing something new. It has always been there. The disinformation, the propaganda, the lies. The manipulation has always been there, but we have managed to put it in a bucket of responsibility and rules. And also now the challenge is that it's just massive and it's global and it's technological. So we need to get it right.
Gabriela, let's finish let's finish around hope, because there's a lot of hope, as we know, in the world of AI as well. Talk to me about some of the things that you've seen happening because of AI that give you that hope.
Well, I can tell you that I come from a family of engineers, and therefore for me, all these developments are just amazing. I mean, who would have told us? We take it for granted, no? I remember when we started having the quality video conferencing with our iPhone. I don't know, but I was not growing up with those kind of features. I was growing with a fixed line and dialing numbers, and then suddenly you could talk to your kids that were in Canada and they were perfectly visible. Now the amazing possibility, like for example, solving issues like the unfolding of the protein, that was one of the research questions most sought after by researchers, and it would have taken us years and years and years to understand this scheme. And AI did it very fast. The COVID vaccine was really found in just 1 year instead of 5 or 8, that was usually the time lag for developing any new vaccine, thanks to the capabilities that AI brought to the table in terms of data analysis and understanding the virus and all of the elements that were attached to it. So I feel that if you think about AI as expanding the capabilities of humans for good, it's just huge. It's huge. I mean, the level of certainty that you get on cancer detection when you have a doctor using AI, you need the doctor, and the doctor is the one that is going to determine the final diagnostic. But the support that they can have on AI is just amazing. I was thinking, for example, for the learning and for the schools, for personalizing education, which is one of the most difficult tasks. Teachers always complain that they have very asymmetric classrooms, and some students are very good, some that are lagging behind. And for them to really try to address the needs of each one of the students was so difficult. On top, they need to do a lot of administrative work. Imagine if we can really support teachers to do the administrative work with the help of AI and reduce it to 10% of the time instead of 60%, to bring more personalization of the education with the students. I think it's just great. And then for democracy, the tool to communicate, to exchange, to really learn, to put your views out no matter what without asking permission for any government. I feel it's just amazing, and to connect people from so many parts of the world that want to do good. I feel it's an amazing tool. And therefore, I would like to leave your audience, not as you're completely right, we should not be scared. Of course, I know that when you do surveys about trust in AI is very low. And therefore, we should be worried, because what happens when people have low trust in these technologies, they don't use it. And then the problem is not benefiting from the massive positive impact that they can have. So I feel it's in our hands. The last word is that it's in our hands. It's us that can shape the technological transition and revolution in a way that help us improve our human outcomes. And we can do it. I'm convinced that we can do it.
Gabriela Ramos, architect of the UNESCO's global standard on the ethics of AI, and a complete inspiration to me. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you, and great that you are really tackling these issues, Jeremy.
Mark Mathieu, welcome to #AI to Peace.
Great to be here, Jeremy.
So look, Mark, you've had an extraordinary career across global brands and technology, from Coca-Cola to Samsung and Salesforce, and now you're deeply engaged with AI. Could you share a little bit about that journey and how your perspective has evolved on the role AI might play in shaping society, ultimately peace?
You and I go way back, and you know me, I've always been interested, and in my work as well as in my life, you know, navigating between the left brain and the right brain of business. And I've started when I was at Coca-Cola talking about the art and science of marketing. At Unilever, I was looking at the logic and magic of how people react to marketing and communication. And then it's when I went to Samsung that I started to really look at the two sides opposite, almost more in terms of tech and humanity, and starting to work on that contradiction between, you know, or appearing contradiction between technology and humanity. And that's really what interested me, this together with the trust imperative. You know, brands are about building trust, building human connection. That led me to get interested in, if it's about humanity versus technology, or humanity and technology, what's next? And what's next is not just AI as we know it today, but it's really the next AI frontier. And that's what I've been working on, is really to understand what's the tech frontier, what's the AI frontier, because that's the only way we're going to be able to define, if we choose to, the human frontier, the next human frontier.
Thank you for that, Mark. And also, I just want to thank you for all the support you've given me over the last 20 years. It's been absolutely incredible, and it's a privilege to know you. So I want to move on to the next question, which is from your vantage point. I mean, you're an incredible storyteller, one of the best marketeers in the world. What concerns you most about the risks AI presents, particularly when it comes to misinformation, polarization, and the potential for instability or conflict as a consequence of that?
Well, I'm a huge fan of Yuval Noah Harari, and he always said that humans cooperate through shared fiction. And the reality, and you say I'm a storyteller, I don't know, but definitely Coca-Cola is. And what we've been working through brands like Coke, through marketing in general, is to create a shared reality at the global scale. That's what I've always been driven by, is to use, global brands as platform to create global shared reality. And the risk is that AI, can actually fracture that. It's, of course, and the WEF Global Risk Report talks about misinformation and disinformation, but also societal polarization. And without shared reality, if AI, which does exactly the opposite of creating shared reality, it creates the ultimate personal reality. When ChatGPT answers to you, it answers not something that's been written before and that it goes and pulls out of the web. It answers something that's a unique response to you. And today it does it using language. All the models are based on language, but tomorrow it will be based on world models or even brain models that basically will go even to the next step, the next frontier of, infinite personalization. And that's where I think the fracture can come. And Tristan Harris, who I've been knowing for quite a long time and who warned everybody how basically, the attention economy, social media has been, the side effects of it. But he said that was only the pilot, and I fully agree. Now AI is the ultimate accelerator to the risk that there might be no common ground left between, one human and another one.
So look, there's a growing sense that without meaningful policy and international cooperation, AI could deepen instability rather than reduce it. How do you see that playing out? And do you feel we're moving quickly enough to put the right safeguards in place?
Everything communicates. And I've really been fascinated. Well, everything communicates. And I've really been fascinated about the terminology that's been used in global AI summits. The very first one, the UK Global AI Safety Summit at the end of 2023 was actually branded Safety Summit. And then Korea in May 24 just branded it Global AI Summit. And then France, back in 25, called it the AI Action Summit. And then in Korea recently, it was called the AI Impact Summit. And so we've been moving very quickly from safety as the number one concern to impact. And that's where the issue is that there is really such a race driven by the tech leaders and the business leaders to develop and implement and win the AI race that, except maybe for the most responsible attempt done today with the EU AI Act, there is really not much federation of that search for some kind of regulation. And there is the false debate about we need to choose between regulate or innovate. And the reality, a lot of regulated industries still innovate. So that's not the issue. It's really that we do need some kind of a Geneva Convention moment for AI, and unfortunately, the business, the geopolitical rivalries don't necessarily make that easy.
Amazing, Mark. Thank you. So, given your background in brand and consumer trust, how do you think we protect truth and maintain trust when AI is increasingly capable of distorting reality at scale?
Yeah, so I think that I've always been fascinated by the concept of trust and the concept of truth. I used to say that marketing was about creating a myth and telling it, and then it became finding a truth and sharing that truth. And I think that we live in a world where indeed truth more than trust is going to become essential. Having visibility, having proof of truth is going to be critical. And actually, as part of what I'm doing now with Rogue Ventures, which is my advisory and investment firm in AI, one of the companies that I'm advising is working exactly on that, on how do you create for business a trust infrastructure, which I do believe is going to be absolutely critical if we want to be able to distinguish what's true and what's not true, what's true and not true in terms of information, but also in terms of intention, in terms of the difference between tomorrow, let's be honest, a human and a robot. How will we make that difference? How will we know for sure? And I was actually amazed. I think it was at GITEX where I saw one startup that was injecting technology in people's body to prove that they were human. And the idea that you put technology in yourself to prove that you're human is kind of like a little bit of a contradictory thought. So I think it's not just about trust, but it's really about truth, which leads to trust.
Look, on the other side of all of this, there's enormous potential. What excites you most about AI's ability to contribute to a more peaceful and sustainable world? And where are you already seeing that potential come to life?
There is a lot of debate, obviously, about the doom and gloom side of AI. And I'm a huge believer. I'm actually an optimist by nature, but I'm a believer that the same technology that we can use, or can be used by bad actors can actually be used, to build bridges, to build, possibilities. And I'm extremely enthused when I see initiatives that, for instance, even simple things like simultaneous AI-based translation that facilitates, connection and even mediation, and the whole image of the Babel Tower may become irrelevant. Maybe we can all speak one voice if we can all seamlessly and in real time communicate with a common understanding of at least what we're talking about. But what I'm really most interested in is really when I look at, for instance, the Sustainable Development Goal. I really feel that a lot of them can be accelerated by one, if not several orders of magnitude by the power of this technology. And so the idea of really accelerating solutions that, let's be honest, us as humans, with our, level of intelligence have failed to solve, or sometimes have even created. And I think that the ability to have a third party with this immense compute capability to leverage, but also to share data. Humans are very bad at sharing data. We think information is power. And this idea that suddenly the AI can, collapse all the knowledge and create new solutions with it is, for me, the beginning of a total new era of development.
Thank you, Mark. So look, as this technology accelerates, what responsibility do leaders, companies, and individuals carry in shaping its direction? And what gives you confidence that we can guide AI in a way that genuinely benefits humanity?
This is the question, Jeremy. This is really the question that unfortunately most people do not ask. Most of the leaders, tech leaders, business leaders that I've worked with, when I was leading AI transformation for Salesforce or now at Rogue Ventures, both with, companies, tech companies, enterprises and startups, are looking at AI as a technology, as an engineering solution to accelerate ROI. And very few people are actually asking the question, what does AI do to people? And what does it mean for the people? How does it make us tomorrow more humans, better humans? And so it's really not a technology or an engineering question we should be asking. It's a values question that we should be asking. And that's what people are not asking. What kind of future do we want for humanity? And that's why, conversations I'm having with the likes of Paula Goldman, who is the Chief Ethics and Human Use Officer at Salesforce, because those are wonderful people who focus on exactly that question. And one of the biggest challenges, Jeremy, that's going to happen is that AI is creating not just a disruption, but it's also decoupling for the first time at that pace and at that scale, income from work. We've been, using work not just as an economic engine, but also as a social and psychological mean. Work has been our identity. Work has been our purpose. And the reality, for the first time, AI disrupts all of that. And so if it's going to create that extraordinary wealth, which I believe it will, that everybody is talking about, how do we humans engineer for AI to create equal shared dignity and shared security? And that's where it comes to peace. It's really this idea, basically, that we are going to give people in the future new reasons to believe, new reasons to exist, new meaning to their life. And if that's what you and I used to do at Coca-Cola when we were, creating shared reality around Coca-Cola and world peace, or what I was doing also with somebody like Bono on poverty and HIV/AIDS, that's what people like you and I should be focusing, doing just that, thinking, how do we create that cultural transformation with people at the core?
Mark Mature, you're just incredible. And it's, as I said, been a massive honor to learn from you for a couple of decades now. So I have to ask you, rogueventures.ai, how do we find out more?
So either, email me, Mark with a C at rogueventures.ai. You can also find me on social networks, Mark F. Math, so MarcF Math. And I'd love to talk more. I think we have an incredible opportunity. But again, it's not a technology opportunity. It's a human opportunity. And if we can, just see it that way, or see it both ways, going back to this, we have two sides in our brain for a reason. And if we only look at the AI revolution with one side of our brain, we will be doomed.
Mark Mature, good luck with Rogue Ventures. Thank you, mate.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Kat Thomas, welcome to AI to Peace.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be here. Brilliant technology.
The first question I want to ask you is, you've been at the forefront of AI development and innovation. Could you tell us about your journey and how your perspective has evolved on the role AI might play in shaping society and ultimately peace?
Well, I come at the AI sort of story very much as a user, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a technologist, average person who initially downloaded ChatGPT out of desperation, trying to figure my way through some problematic situations. I was dealing with elderly parents. They were needing to move into care. Then I had to figure out what to do with property. And it was very complicated, very stressful. And I kept hitting barrier after barrier. And I eventually turned to AI really as a desperate measure to see if, I'm going to download this thing called ChatGPT, see if it can help. And it did an incredible job of resolving some really tricky situations. And that was my entry point, really. I took away a view from that whilst AI is going to be profound in its impact, it's going to be huge. I started to build a train of thought around, I suppose, a sense of optimism that whilst there is a lot of doom and gloom and a lot of concern about AI, I also could see little chinks of light sort of shining through in terms of where it could help and where it could be positive. So my start point really wasn't as an expert or a technologist or a scientist. It was looking at it through an everyday lens, and particularly as a woman, looking at it through how it could help me push forward when sometimes I might hold back. And that's when I just started to get more and more interested in the power and the potential of AI in a consumer tool-facing way.
Well, you talked about concerns. From your vantage point, what concerns you most about the risks AI presents, particularly in relation to misinformation, polarization, and the potential for instability or conflict?
Look, I think we have to be real. I think that there are some huge concerns around AI. I think that where I come at it, I'm less sort of focused on, the profound impact, and I'm more sort of having conversations around the day-to-day impact, although neither is more important than the other. As I said, I'm wired to be optimistic, but eyes open. And I think that, the impact is going to be huge. There is huge problems around misinformation, around bias. And in the book that I've written, Weapons of Mass Confidence, the theory is that, or the optimism is that I think that tools like this can be beneficial and helpful for women in a number of ways. But I do sort of frame that and look at it through the lens of, we have to navigate through some very difficult times and challenges as a result of this new technology too. So I think there are huge challenges, huge concerns, but then there are also opportunities and some realities that it is here, and we need to go into this new era with our eyes open. And that's to the risks, and that's to the concerns, and that's to the threats. But I very much have focused on how women in a day-to-day sense can use these tools to just push themselves forward, to motivate themselves, find a little bit more confidence, or lean into them when they're really struggling on emotional bandwidth. So my perspective on AI is very much, the utility of it, less at a sort of governmental or policy level, and more at a day-to-day average human level. And that's been the area that I've focused on.
Yeah, let's talk about policy just a little bit. I mean, this phrase, we do lots of different shows, as no climate action, no peace, or no peace, no climate action. And so, no AI policy, no peace. I mean, what's coming, down the road is pretty monumental in relation to the changes in our lives. And without proper policy, then of course we could have people who are, concerned and without jobs and, are not happy. And so, of course, we need to kind of preempt that. And policy, of course, is a big part of creating peace in the future. So there's this growing sense that without meaningful policy and global cooperation, AI could deepen instability rather than reduce it. How do you see the role of policy evolving? And are we moving quickly enough to safeguard society?
Look, there's a number of questions there. I think my overarching view would be policy matters. Absolutely. I think it will, in reality, always lag behind behavior. And that is something that we have to sort of navigate around. I think what is moving at pace is how people are using these tools for good and bad, and how they're using them in a sort of day-to-day context. So, I'm torn because there is one immediate sort of lever, which is around policy, and it's important. Equally, there is a vital need for education and understanding, and on the flip side, people not pulling away from it out of fear or concern or nervousness. So I think policy needs to go hand in hand with education and confidence and understanding sort of behavioral patterns and how people are using these tools and the potential for where they could go. So I think policy is, I suppose, one part of the conversation, really. And I'm not a policy expert. I think it's necessary, but I think it will always lag, sadly, behind behavior because people move more quickly than policy is able to be put together, because policy in its very nature is reactive. So I think the two things need to go hand in hand: policy, education, deepening understanding.
Kat, you are a communications expert. Not 3 Times is your new venture, which is very exciting, and we wish you the best with it. So I want to ask you, AI is capable of distorting reality at scale, we know. So how do we protect truth and maintain trust when the line between real and fabricated content is becoming increasingly difficult to detect?
Again, a really sort of challenging space. And I think we are going to see huge abuses of that and the landscape shift enormously in the next sort of 3 to 5 years. And you're right, as someone that has specialized for the last 25 years in reputation and truth, and I suppose ensuring that the correct messages are taken out to people sort of far and wide. For me, and I would always look through the lens of doubling down on prioritizing and investing in reliable, trusted sources. I think that there's going to be a very interesting sort of shift and movement around, again, the consumer-facing, public-facing tools, where they are, those sites and sources that they're scraping for that information. I think people will need to learn to look at that with a lot more scrutiny. Like, what keeps me awake at night is people just firing up an app, firing up an AI tool, asking a question, not looking at the source or where the information is coming from and believing it as gospel truth. Whereas we're going to enter an era where eyes open scrutiny around what is true, what isn't. I mean, we're very much in that era now, even in a day-to-day sense, when I'm constantly scrolling on social media and I'll see something and then I have to look twice. And then I'm like, that's not real. And, it's a disappointing reality that we have now entered that era where we have to scrutinize everything. And I think that we are just going to have to get more astute and more adept and more native to critical thinking, not more lax about it. I think that is going to be the reality of it all.
Yeah, there's something very interesting in us analysing the information that we see, that kind of critical thinking that you're talking about. Actually, there's something very constructive and positive, in that. So that's really interesting. On the other side of this, there's enormous potential, right? We know that. And what excites you most about AI's ability to contribute to a more peaceful and sustainable world? And where are you already seeing that potential realised?
Well, for me, as I sort of kicked off the conversation, I have come into the conversation and the debate around AI through the lens of optimism. And with Weapons of Mass Confidence, I was motivated to write the book because I just saw and experienced firsthand what support, what infrastructure AI tools can give people, and for me, particularly women. And I think there's 2 areas, right? I think women hold back sometimes, and I think that's a confidence factor. Should I start the business? Should I put in a loft conversion? Should I transition to an electric car? I don't know enough about this. I'm going to hold back. Or similarly, I think women have an enormous mental load, and I think bandwidth is often a challenge. Have I got time to research how to transition to an electric car? Have I got time to understand and research whether it would make sense for me financially to start my own business? I just don't have the mental bandwidth. I'm going to park it. And I think it's those 2 areas that particularly interest me, is how AI will push women forward and help women progress when they might have held back. And similarly, when it might have just been there's a phrase I use, which is the too hard basket, when it's you want to do it, you know it's the right thing to do, but it's too hard to figure out. I think that AI can show up in a positive way for people in their lives that can help move them forward and help make decisions they otherwise would have held back from. So that's the area of optimism that I really sort of started to unpack in the book, because, I think life is complicated. Life is getting harder. Job stability is getting tougher. We're in a really sort of tricky time in history, and confidence and mental bandwidth is highly, highly valuable. And as I said, I've looked at it particularly through the sort of female lens. And if these tools can be weaponized for good and to push women forward when they would have held back, and to help them cope with an increasing sort of mental load, then that's where I lean in a more optimistic sense.
What an amazing book. Weapons of Mass Confidence. Oh, there it is. That's awesome. Weapons of Mass Confidence. Really great. Really good luck. Really good luck.
Thank you. Have you written a book? I feel like you have.
I have, actually, yeah.
I remember seeing it. I mean, it's a big labor of love. I'm a creative in my day job, and I was a true creative by going, I've had an idea, I can do this. And then I didn't really think about the 8 or 9 months of research and editing and rewriting, but it is a proud moment when you finally get it launched. So thank you.
We wish you the very best with Weapons of Mass Confidence. What a great book. What a wonderful title. Good luck with that, Kat.
Thank you.
As this technology accelerates, what responsibility do leaders, companies, and individuals carry in shaping it? And what gives you hope that we can guide AI in a direction that genuinely benefits humanity?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting flag around sort of responsibility and the sort of human future. Responsibility isn't really abstract. For me, it's how we choose to use it, how people choose to use it, how we use it daily. And I think there's sort of 3 simple responsibilities at a human level. Ask better questions and have your eyes open when you're looking at and figuring out how to use these tools and how to integrate them into your life. Be curious about how these things work, where this information is coming from, not be sort of passive and just sort of take it and run with it. But as we touched on previously, I think the third is use AI to gather information and make yourself the most informed version of yourself possible, but never let it replace your thinking. As we said, never let it, sway your judgments or get lax in using your own sort of human brain power. I think AI is a tool. AI is a great rehearsal room. AI is an infrastructure to help build confidence or save time, but it is absolutely not your second brain. It is not there to replace your thinking. So I take the view that we should be optimistic, but we need to be grounded. We need to have our eyes open, and we need to never stop asking questions when we're asking questions.
Kat Thomas, latest company, Knock 3 Times, and latest book, Weapons of Mass Confidence. What incredible names you've come up with. Unforgettable. Clearly an amazing communications expert. Good luck on your journey, Kat.
Thank you very much. And good luck on yours. I mean, I feel like you're midway through and there's another marathon or 2 to run, because you just keep going and going. It's super, super impressive. So congratulations.
Thank you, Kat. Well, listen, in September, I'm going to launch a 5-year campaign that I'm immensely excited about and we've been working on for a long time. So, here we go again. And thanks a lot. Yes, and, good luck with everything, Kat.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Nick Feingold, always a pleasure, and welcome to AI to Peace. I have to thank you for your long-standing support of Peace One Day for so many years. Now, you've been working at the intersection of innovation, business, and now AI through curation. Could you start by sharing a little bit about your journey and how your perspective has evolved on the role technology, and now AI, plays in shaping society and ultimately peace?
I've always had a view, and I think probably you know this better than most, that I'm not sure it's AI specific, right? In other words, when you and I met 25 years ago, we gave you free accommodation and seats in our office and sat you down for 10 years without charge. And we could do that because the business was going well. So running a successful business and one's philanthropic goals are usually tied in some way. You know, if the economic output of the business is profitable and successful, then you can pursue your philanthropic aims. And so you and I were always conjoined in that regard. Our business helped you fulfill your ambitions, and your ambitions were somewhat different to ours at the time. And in some ways, AI hasn't changed that at all. I suppose that, in fact, actually, I think probably AI is going to present the greatest challenge of our time in terms of how we structure economic output and recycle it back into the community. And so, that's how we did it with you in the early days. And I think, one of the reasons for this series is to try and figure out what that looks like. It's to take the world's most successful businesses. Currently now they serve only shareholders. In future, they may have to serve shareholders and society at large, and working on how to achieve that is one of the things that I find most fascinating, I think. So AI is going to present us with a whole new set of challenges. Successful businesses will do well. I feel maybe what we used to call the mutual might have a role to play in this. So, for example, it might sound like complicated financial parlance, but it's not. The Nationwide Building Society is owned by its customers. I suppose the difference is Facebook is owned by its shareholders, not its content creators. And so somewhere in the future, that intersection of shareholder versus customers, the customers make the business. So maybe we can engineer a way for them to share in the economic output of that with shareholders. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but it's a stab at answering it. It's a very complex question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex issue. We're going to delve into it even deeper. First of all, before we just leave the whole Peace One Day story, I mean, you mentioned that you had supported us for 25 years in the most remarkable way. Unlike many, actually, I mean, I've had a lot of support, but the support that you gave me was just absolutely extraordinary. And you continue to do to this day. What kept you so committed all these years, Nick, to us?
Well, I always felt that there are two sort of approaches to philanthropy, and one, maybe more than that, maybe three. I mean, there's a scientific approach, which I've seen adopted by some extremely rich people, and by the way, it's not a criticism of any of the approaches, it's just personal choice. But they're scientific, data-driven approaches that they want to optimize every single pound and every single dollar, and they want to be completely controlling over the way that those funds are dispensed and spent, knowing that every penny goes to exactly where it should go. And that's kind of interesting. Then I think that maybe the second category is, deeply personal, where somebody's suffered a loss or is emotionally tied to a disease or something's happened in their life to profoundly affect their personal situation and circumstances, so they do something around that. And then number three is who I believed at the time to be certifiably bonkers, as did everybody else, when you said you wanted to establish the world's first global ceasefire day. And that to me was, category three, which is maybe the most entrepreneurial and most creative of all, which is, and I think I said this to you at the time, because I remember people saying it to you at the time, and people will still say it, people aren't going to stop fighting. And never has that been more relevant than today, to which your answer was, without an attempt, without a very first single stepping stone, which is a day of peace where people may lay down their arms, What chance have we got? And so from my point of view, I've always identified with the third category, which is once upon a time somebody would have gone, I know what we're going to do. We're going to paint a red cross on the side of white ambulances and no one's going to shoot at them. And that would have been considered to have been pretty mental as well at the time. Yet it worked. And yet your global ceasefire day worked. And yet on that day, we've achieved remarkable things in terms of some people have laid down arms and we have been able to go in there and do interesting shit. So I would say that, the reason I supported it is the power of imagination.
Thanks, Nick. So, look, you've been instrumental in bringing this idea of AI to peace into focus. You advise me, you talk to me about policy, etc. Why do you feel the moment that we're in right now, I'll get onto policy in a moment, but why do you feel the moment is so critical now? What is it about AI that makes this conversation not just important, but urgent in the context of peace and global stability?
Well, again, if I was to use a corporate analogy for politics, if a company CEO had constantly failed, if his product had been marginalized, if he or she's approach and culture of that company was broken, right, you would usually seek to change the CEO and change the executives. I would say that the democracy is being challenged by like never before. I think the political structures that exist within democracies ensure that pretty much anyone that attempted to fix the problem would fail. So even if you had capable candidates, which I think most people probably believe we don't, we've seen decade after decade of policy and political failure as a result of a broken system. That system is now going to be challenged like never before by AI. I don't quite know where we're going, but I do know where we're starting. And I do know that there's going to be a transition to get there. And I do know that the electoral cycles of 4 or 5 years, depending upon which geography you reside in, are completely out of kilter with what needs to be a 10, 20-year plan, because there will be a transition. And I'm not unoptimistic about the future. I'm optimistic about the future. We could end up in a world that is infinitely improved upon the one in which we currently live, and that's progress. But how we get there with minimizing the response to unemployment and in a humane way is really what we need to really start to charter. And politicians really are highly focused on the next electoral cycle, but we need to have 10, 20-year policies to try and work out how to deal with the current situation. And so we're at a collision of two vast trends. One is ongoing political and policy failure, and then now the challenges that the historical system face are going to be, if you like, turbocharged by AI and the velocity at which it moves. So to answer your question, it's more critical now than ever for that reason, the intersection of those two colliding vessels.
Can we talk about, from your vantage point, what concerns you most about the risks AI presents? We'll be more specific, particularly when we look at misinformation, polarization, and the potential for increased instability or conflict. Where do you see the greatest points of tension?
Last week, we saw Scott Bessent call heads of the banking and insurance industries to the White House because Anthropic decided to hold back the release of a large language model called Mythos. And what that really means is that, again, like most of these things, you can view it as the solution to cybercrime, or you can view it as the amplification of cybercrime, which is already at vast levels. But essentially, you know, attacks on the grid, bioweapons, there's a whole host of different bad uses to which these large language models can be put. But then, like all other technologies, there's a whole host of solutions to some of the world's most complex and critical problems that they can solve. So cancer, you know, maths, physics, material science. So you know, like there's not a technology I've ever come across that can't be used for incredible good and incredible harm. I mean, I think if you look at you know, social media and the era of knowledge and intelligence that we've entered to, you can see why every child in the world could now get a tailored education wherever they are geographically through their smartphone. You could also see why the same smartphone could be used for or could result in a tragic child or teenage suicide having been groomed by a person or algorithms. So, you know, there's just a huge sort of bid offer spread, and as I said before, a transition that we have to walk, and the job has to be to make that transition as smooth as possible. You know, a lot of the wildly optimistic people sort of say it's going to create millions of jobs. That's called the Jevons paradox, and a lot of wildly negative people think that there's going to be colossal and mass unemployment. What I would say that concerns me is that the unemployment is more likely to come before the new jobs are created, and therefore that could lead to social unrest. We've seen the social contract with students completely broken. We see job entry levels, you know, historic lows. The analogy I'd like to use is, you know, during the agricultural revolution, when they invented the plough, the farm worker that was fired didn't walk off the field and into a factory and into the Industrial Revolution. It took time for that transition to take place. So navigating the transition is really what concerns me most.
You've been very clear, Nick, thank you for that, about, you know, the issues around no AI policy, no peace. And that's really struck a chord with me. And in fact, we've asked this question to everybody as a consequence of your creativity. Can you unpack that for us? What does that really mean in practical terms? And how urgent is the need for global cooperation and policy in this space?
Well, I mean, there's the element of peace, which is really could be framed in two words: social unrest. You know, are we going to have huge social unrest? There's been immense inequality for years, and I see that as a situation that is getting worse unless we can find some mechanism of redistribution, you know, of wealth or better lives for people. And again, there's a hugely optimistic place here, which is where everybody, you know, can sort of be at the receiving end of abundance, which is what the bullish people call it, an era of abundance where robots do the housework, robots are affordable, you know, where food is plentiful, where energy is plentiful because, you know, AI has cracked fusion, or there are data centers in space. So really, you know, it's a question of, you know, having some sort of policies in place to navigate this transition. And if we don't, there's going to be terrible social unrest. And also, I think in the geopolitical sense, you may be seeing that play out now over power, which is basically oil, energy, and chips, yeah, and Taiwan. And Chinese are interested in Taiwan because of Taiwan Semiconductor as one of the only people that can manufacture chips in the world, and America is interested in making sure that energy is plentiful around the world so it can power data centers. And so, you know, I've never seen such so much macroeconomic sort of strife around some of the problems and challenges that AI are causing, and that precipitates itself in some regards in wars. You know, I guess we'll never know totally the cause of what's happening in Iran and Ukraine. But I think we can safely say that the world's never been less peaceful. And if you look in your crystal ball, the challenges aren't going to get any smaller going forward, really.
Okay, so we're entering a world where AI can distort reality at scale. In your view, how do we protect truth and maintain trust when the line between real and fabricated content is becoming increasingly blurred?
Yeah, I mean, I think to be decided, but labels, watermarks, trusted sources. I think authenticity will trade at a premium. I think, that society will divide itself into those that totally immerse themselves in technology and those that go back to community and nature. I really do believe that. I don't know that it's that it answers your question directly in regards of, how do you tell what's true and what's untrue? But I think people will choose different lives. Yeah, I think Homo sapiens are kind of done, right? And what I mean by that is if there was Neanderthal man and Homo erectus, and you looked at Homo sapiens, I think you wouldn't call us Homo sapiens anymore. I think you'd call us Homo mobilis, right? In other words, people sort of say, well, man and digital intelligence are not going to merge. It's like, well, we already have. So 50 years down the line, I think that we may well be called Homo mobilis, the first time that every human being on the planet had a personal computer in their hand. That moves from hand to brain implant to glasses to sort of all sorts of things. And so where truth and trust and all of those things sit within that, I think that, as I said, the Pavlovian response of some people, or the response of some people, will be to go back to farm, go back to nature, go back to community, could unlock tens of thousands of people to look after people with mental health issues because they're freed up by not having to work, and that might be a truth in terms of that the digital life is just too complicated for them. So they sort of almost it's like the Amish at scale, it's like vinyl records. Some people went back to vinyl records after a digital age because they just love that. And then society will progress, and I guess one of the problems we have to crack is authenticity, honesty, and what's real and what's not. And that is not a problem that I have. It's not a question I can answer right now, but very simply, labeling stuff as AI generated would be a very first simple step to in terms of you label stuff in the supermarket to try and make sure that your food is what it is, and standards and some regulation it will be required undoubtedly, but a very first simple step, which is that a law suggesting that AI content be labeled as AI generated content, or a fine or something like that, may be a very, very simple first step in sort of responding to your question.
Nick, at the same time, there is extraordinary potential here. What excites you most about AI's ability to contribute to a more peaceful and sustainable world? And where are you already seeing examples of the positive potential being realized?
Well, I think, again, it's a double-edged sword, right, in almost every field. But, education, you can start when you've got infinite knowledge in your hand, you could see why every single child could have an education, right? And a tailored education, and why no one would fail. And if you look at some pilot programs in the States that are using, AI, or they're called AI academies, they are basically using AI to gamify education, make education interesting. I've worked on a pilot project with Bradfield College, which is my old school, and they've built a virtual reality campus. And now, when you read the students' war poetry, they are in the middle of a mustard gas attack during the First World War. Their retention rates soar. They relate to the poetry. They understand it. They remember it. They do better. I think we'll look back at the way we educated children as barbaric, So that's like that's a huge area of positivity. But then on the other side, what we discussed earlier in this broadcast is that I went up to Manchester University, and I could see why every student coming out, not every student, but a lot of students coming out of there are going to be really angry. If you're not AI native coming out of university, it's like walking out of university into a world where you can't read and write, And so there's going to be huge upheaval in education at the same time that there's huge potential in education. And that really is, why it's very difficult to answer any of your questions directly. If we crack fusion and we have abundant energy, then energy kind of solves everything, because you can desalinate water. And if you can desalinate water cheaply, you can keep people where they are. It solves migration in many ways. So there are a lot of potential wins in the pipeline in health and energy and education. And there's a lot of trauma in health and energy and education because of the demand for power, and because AI changes everything. And so, it's hard to craft policies, but we need to engage with people that are at least thinking about it, and maybe using AI to help AI to solve some of the problems created by AI is the solution. And I know that there are initiatives to try to do that from people that are far cleverer than I. So again, there are huge positives, and with every positive comes a set of consequences, because it requires change at a speed that the world is struggling to go at.
Nick, so as this technology accelerates that you were just talking about, what responsibility do leaders in business, technology and beyond carry in shaping its direction? And what needs to happen now to ensure we steer this in a way that benefits humanity as a whole?
Look, I think, again, if you were looking at Davos a couple of years ago, it wasn't on the agenda. This year, no one was discussing, not no one was discussing anything other than AI. That's not correct. But, AI was firmly on the agenda. There are initiatives by Sir Paul Marshall called the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. I'm sure that there are initiatives within the UN, and I'm sure that there are hundreds of private initiatives, in the space to try and figure it out. But, my distress is really at the fact that, like a lot of super important subjects, it's not on the agenda of a lot of politicians because it's not a vote winner. Yeah, and it's quite frightening, because there is a possibility of huge unemployment, right? And whatever you believe that possibility to believe, and whatever, it's clear, that there's clearly evidence that every organization is going to restructure in some way, shape or form. And that's super clear. What's less clear is the jobs that are coming. And again, people correctly say that new industries will emerge. If I had said to you that there will be a job called a personal trainer, or not to you, but maybe to your grandfather or great grandfather, and he will sit in front of you and go, "Well done, Jeremy, for lifting weights," and you'll pay him £50 an hour. Your grandfather or your great grandfather would have thought that was utterly ridiculous. And so I'm sure there'll be millions of new jobs, but the new jobs are going to come after the job losses. And so we just have to get it on the political agenda. Again, maybe this is a better story, but I was with an Uber driver the other night, and I said, what are you going to do when autonomous cars arrive? And he looked at me and he said, "You see that parking space over there, right? An autonomous car would never be able to get into that." And the roads of London are too narrow. And I'm like, this guy's a hardworking guy with 3 kids, yeah? And hopefully we need to come up with some sort of policy that provides him with some sort of cushion over the period of the transition. So maybe if you're like a London driver, you get some of the economics of the autonomous car whilst you're working out what you can do next. But that 45-year-old hardworking dad with 3 kids is never going to be, is probably never going to be an AI native. I've got 30-year-olds in my office that are probably too old to be an AI native. and so I worry about all of that, and I worry about the politicians' inability to address that, because it's not a vote winner, and that's kind of really that's really upsetting.
Well, Nick, it's been incredible listening to you today. So finally, for anyone watching, individuals, organizations, and young people around the world, what would you encourage them to do right now to help ensure that AI becomes a force for good and not a driver of division?
Well, I think you just have to leap headlong into it. You know, as I said, if you know, I've been working with some students at Manchester University, and they know how to use AI to hand in their homework. Right? They know how to use AI to hand in their coursework. And so what's slightly disturbing is that the coursework is written by AI, but what's worse is that the lecturers mark it with AI, which is sort of undermines the entire foundations of what an education historically was supposed to be about. And so, you know, if you're not starting to, embrace it in terms of using agentic AI, building agents, right, using all of the tools that are available, it's like coming out of an educational establishment not learning how to read and write, which I've just said before. So you just have to dive into it, and then you have to dive into it, I think, probably with a hyper specialized problem. Like find a problem and use it to solve a problem. Don't use it to cheat on your homework, you know. And there are millions and millions of problems out there which augmented and supplemented by human oversight can lead you to a really promising future. And again, I was listening to this Moonshot podcast, which I listen to quite a lot. You know, we've got the first £1 billion plus unicorn with only one person in charge, which is a company selling weight loss drugs, somewhat unsurprisingly. But, you know, you don't have to pay for coding anymore. That's not true. You can code far more efficiently, but the capital required to code is now done by LLMs. The traditional barriers to entrepreneurial pursuits are now much lower than they ever were. Yeah. And so again, a huge amount of positive things that could come out of this for young people. In fact, the average age of the startup industry is sort of collapsing from 40 into the mid-20s, because AI native youngsters are doing extremely well. The flip side of that is that if you're not a self-starter, if you literally, just lean on the experiential side of university and decide you want to drink beer all the time, like my own son, then you're going to have a really, really rough ride coming out of it. So just, leap fully into it. You're young. You've got huge ambitions and dreams. So embrace it, and don't stick it in a dark corner and think because you're coming out with a first class honours degree or a 2-1 that life's going to be okay. That would be my I don't know if that's good advice or bad advice, but that would probably be my advice.
Thank you, Nick, for participating in AI to Peace.
Thanks, Jay.
Deborah, welcome to #AI to Peace.
Hi, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Deborah, you've had an incredible career, and through that, you've developed a deep understanding of AI. Could you share a little bit about your journey and how your perspective has evolved on the role AI might play in shaping society and ultimately peace?
Sure, Jeremy. So I spent my career in the consumer goods sector, living in 3 continents, working for global companies like L'Oreal, AB InBev, Mondelez, and Unilever, where I served as the Global Growth Operations Officer. And then for almost 3 years, I led enterprise strategy and transformation, partner with the CEOs. And 2 years ago, as part of that role, I shaped the AI immersion for Unilever C-suite in Silicon Valley, where we met and engaged with the key leaders of the players shaping this revolution from NVIDIA, Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft. And that was a defining moment for me. That's when I realized how AI would rewire how companies operate, how value is created, how society would change. That was the backdrop for developing the 2030 enterprise strategy for the company. And I ensured that AI was embedded at the core of it as a key strategic driver for value creation for the company. But I also decided to go deeper personally. I went on to complete executive programs in AI and leadership at MIT, at Stanford, including spending 6 weeks in Silicon Valley, immersed myself last year. And I made a commitment to use AI every day, right? I decided to be an AI-driven leader. And you cannot lead AI transformation delegating it or from a distance. So as Ethan Mollick would say, you have to experiment what he calls the jagged frontier. Sometimes AI performs brilliantly, the next it fails miserably, right? So as we move from assistant AI to agentic AI, it's even more important that you have this hands-on intuition. So for companies, AI creates value from productivity, which is the obvious point for you to start. You're going to have outcomes faster, more efficiently, but I'm much more energized about AI unlocking growth. And I've been speaking, engaging with leaders across the spectrum, across different sectors, and I'm seeing firsthand how they're unlocking real value beyond the hype. And then for society, I think the parallel holds as people can delegate repetitive, non-value-added tasks to AI, that frees us up to do what we do at best, right? Unleashing creativity, imagination, originality. So one key example of that for me is AlphaFold, the 50-year challenge that was cracked by AI in predicting protein structure. You may have seen this, that led to the Nobel Prize in chemistry in 2024. So for me, that is AI at its best.
Incredible, Deborah. So listen, from your vantage point, what concerns you most about the risks AI presents, particularly in relation to misinformation, polarization, and the potential for instability or conflict?
The risk that I think most about from a business standpoint is trust. Because trust is the invisible infrastructure of both marketing societies. So misinformation can erode consumer confidence, polarization can fragment communities that brands depend on, and instability disrupts the environment that companies operate in, right? And AI can amplify these dynamics. So for me, governance becomes even more critical, making sure that if you have human judgment and human oversight is not an optional, you must have those. So leaders who assume that AI will behave consistently cannot rely on that. Right. So they will need much more transparency and integrity, not only as compliance requirements, but paramount as they lead businesses.
So this phrase, no AI policy, no peace. There's a growing sense that without meaningful policy and international cooperation, AI could deepen instability rather than reduce it. How do you see the role of policy evolving? And do you feel we're moving quickly enough to safeguard people?
Meaningful policy international collaboration is critical. It's essential, full stop. I'm not a policy expert, but I try to follow the leaders shaping the landscape and this revolution. And what I observe as of late is encouraging. I think self-organization is emerging. You may have seen the project Glasswing that Anthropic launched last week, which is bringing around 40 organizations around Claude Mythos, which is their most powerful model. And it is deploying its capabilities for defensive cybersecurity as opposed to offensive ones. And the fact that Anthropic is bringing the industry, mobilizing all the players, and not deploying access to public before they understand the power of this model, for me, is responsible leadership that we need more of. Right? And companies cannot wait for policy because regulation and legislation will move slower than technology. So I believe the business that are really responsible will be proactive, setting standards, being transparent in how they are using AI, and also make sure that they're thinking carefully how that impacts the people who they serve. I joined recently the Alpha Council, which is a global leadership network that brings together directors as well as executives to navigate AI governance in this age that we're living. So that is like build intelligence, peer-to-peer, as opposed to wait for regulations to come.
You know, Deborah, AI is increasingly capable, as you know, of distorting reality at scale. In your view, how do we protect truth and maintain trust when the line between real and fabricated content is becoming much harder to detect?
Trust is not only a business asset in my view, it is a social contract. And I agree that AI can put that at risk. For me, there are 3 points to that matter. 1, we need provenance, better system marking where the content is coming from so that people can make informed judgment on what they're saying. 2, literacy, investing in critical thinking skills so that people can understand and navigate a world that what appears to be may not be what they're saying. And 3, accountability, right? Set transparent systems for every company using AI as they create and distribute content. But I'm an optimistic, Jeremy. I believe with Gen AI raising the floor and having giving access to everyone to have better quality, I think what will make companies, brands distinctive are really like the human judgment, the human expertise and taste. So again, I put a premium on human oversight and human governance as we think about trust. And to me, the technologies is only as good or as dangerous as the values of the people who are deploying it.
I mean, look, you're right. There is enormous potential, isn't it? You're an optimist, you know, and therefore, what excites you most about AI's ability to contribute to a more peaceful and sustainable world? And where are you already seeing that potential in action?
Indeed, Jeremy, I am fundamentally an optimistic, and throughout my career, at least in the past 15 years, I have launched platforms. Being a champion, I sponsor a believer that business have the responsibility, but also the opportunity to not only bring business results, but also have a positive impact in society. And as I think about what I want to do next, for example, my North Star is to be a leader that leverages AI to not only bring business outcomes, but also a better world, honestly. I think, as I said before, at the moment that AI takes care of repetitive tasks, especially in the agentic AI world that we're coming to live in, we will have more time for what we do at best: creativity, original thinking, empathy. And as I said, I think AlphaFold is an example, an incredible example what it can do for science and discovery. And I think it's only the beginning what can be possible in medicine, in climate, and in education, and really using this technology to solve the biggest problems that we have in the world.
Thank you, Deborah. You're an inspiration to me. Thank you for participating in AI to Peace, and good luck on your journey.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's my pleasure, and I appreciate the invite to be part of this beautiful platform.
Matt, welcome to AI to Peace.
Pleasure to be here, Jeremy.
So Matt, you've been building and leading technology companies for decades, long before AI became part of the mainstream conversation. Could you take us through that journey and how your perspective has evolved on the role AI might now play in shaping society and ultimately peace?
Wow, that's a pretty big question. I think the reality is, Jeremy, that artificial intelligence has been part of the technology stack for 20 years or more. What's actually happened recently is it's just become more accessible. Prior to a couple of years ago, 2024, AI was the domain of the nerdy and the wealthy. And thanks to LLMs, it's now been made accessible to everybody. The reality is that LLMs like ChatGPT and so on are just part of a big stack of artificial intelligence technologies that we've been using for a decade or more. And like I say, it's just really the accessibility to these technologies that has changed. So, as far as we're concerned, AI is not a sinecure in and of itself. It's just part of a technology stack that enables us to deliver business solutions for our customers. It's the perception of AI that's very different. And I think generally the perception of AI is some sort of lethal cocktail of technology and evil people that are coming together to try and destroy what we hold dear to us. And that's not really the way it is. There are countless cases across the globe of AI being used for the most fantastic altruistic purposes in medicine, in food security, in energy, social care, etc., etc. But of course, blood sells papers, so people are not really interested in the fact that, the Saudi Arabian government has built the most amazing AI scanning system for radiology. That doesn't sell newspapers, so people prefer to talk about AI in the context of sort of killer bots and drones and all this sort of stuff that we have to ingest every day on the news. So I think the perspective is skewed, and I think generally it's the responsibility of individuals and organizations like yourself, like us, to create the right positive narrative that people can engage with. It's the Wild West out there, and everyone's building code at alarming rates. It's ungoverned, it's unsafe, a lot of it is unethical. So there will be some issues that we have to deal with, but I think generally the movement is good. And I hope it continues that way, to be frank.
Yes, me too, Matt. And listen, at Green Lemon Company, you've been supporting Peace One Day for a long time. You're an amazing man, and I've got to thank you for all the incredible support, Matt, that you've given us. Tell us a little bit before we move on about Green Lemon Company, would you?
Yeah, I'd be delighted. I mean, we're a small player in the grand scheme of things. We're a technology business. We've been going since 2003. We've got the most amazing team of people who I love dearly working for the company. And as I think you know, about 4 or 5 years ago, we pivoted the company from a profit-led company to a purpose-led. And the way we operate now is everything we do is viewed through the lens of the United Nations SDGs. And we're always trying to find customers and projects that really take the world towards a better future. The sort of simple version of that is Tech for Good is our purpose. And everybody in the company embraces that. And it's a wonderful place to work. We love it dearly. So we're in that great sector of software development, software engineering, which is being shaken up massively by what's coming in terms of the emerging technologies. So in one sense, it's very frightening because it's reshaping the business under our feet. Another aspect is it's extremely exciting because we're involved in amazing projects with wonderful customers. That's us. That's what we do. That's what we love. That's our purpose in life.
Yeah. And I mean, I just know that, Matt. I mean, I don't know how long we've done together now, 10 years, where you've just upheld the Peace One Day website. You're always there for us on the end of the phone whenever we need you. You know, you're an amazing man and an amazing company, and Peace One Day is immensely grateful to you.
Well, you're very kind, but it's the guys as well. It's the whole organisation, and everybody likes working on Peace One Day. And I also extend a deep debt of gratitude to OutSystems for providing the platform for peace, as we now call it, Platform for Peace. That's, it's a great title. But it's a pleasure to serve, and I think if you do see, it's pretty common now where companies like us put something back into their communities and organisations like yourself, and I think it's the right thing to do. We've got a lot of power at our fingertips with technology, and it makes all the staff feel really, really good and really valued that they're doing something towards world peace. I mean, what better cause can there be? Without peace, everything fails. So, to us, it's a really important mission, and we're very happy to do it, Jeremy.
Okay, so from your vantage point as a technologist and an entrepreneur, what concerns you most about the systemic risk AI presents today, particularly in relation to misinformation, social polarization, and the potential of instability at scale?
Yeah, I mean, these are huge questions, and we could occupy hours and hours sort of discussing this. And I think you're right to raise these questions. The threat is real, and the threat is here, and we see it all the time. And I think the issues of misinformation, of synthetic data, of societal polarization, all these risks absolutely exist, and we are seeing a lot of instances where exploitation is taking place. For example, where fraudulent activity is accelerating and so on. So I think it is a real threat. I know it's a real threat, and I know it's here right now. And I honestly believe that there is a threat that underlines this, and that is that access to these technologies is expensive, and at the moment it sits in the world of organizations like Facebook, like Google, like Amazon, and so on. And I think that there's a big danger there in that we're talking about putting the power of AI in the hands of very few organizations and very few individuals. Now, I would love to have the debate with people like Google and Facebook and so on, but I still think shareholder primacy is an enormous issue with these companies. So are they purpose-led or are they profit-led? I suspect at the moment they're profit-led. And that means these large organizations are currently controlling the narrative, whereas really it should be the governments and the people that control the direction of AI in terms of its ethical use, its ethical deployment, and so on. So, what do we do in the face of these large corporations owning the narrative? It's really simple. We all have to be involved. We all have to get involved. And we have to be interested in what's going on. We have to use our local politicians and our influence groups and communities to have our own narrative in the debate, and do everything we can to make sure that we don't end up in what I see as the greatest threat, which is polarization of these technologies, as in it's only the wealthy that can access these technologies, and that would be absolutely devastating across the world. And we've already seen this massive polarization in access to resources like even food and water and energy, and now we're polarizing wealth. Do we really want to polarize technology? I don't think we should. So at a very high level, I think it's the responsibility of wealthy nations to bring less wealthy neighbors to the party. And I think for the big tech organizations to make the technology accessible to all. I think it's really important that it's kind of like democratization of AI. And like I say, I think the big danger is if big tech holds all the keys, then their level of influence is too great.
Thank you, Matt. This phrase, no AI policy, no peace. There's this growing sense that without coordinated policy and global cooperation, AI could amplify instability rather than reduce it. So how do you see the balance between innovation and regulation? And do you feel we're moving quickly enough to put meaningful safeguards in place?
Yeah, are we moving quickly enough? Definitely not. That is a challenge, but there is an awful lot of good work being done across all the nations to try and get this right. And the UK is a big part of that. I had the pleasure of working with a group in Brighton, and we had Peter Carl as one of our guest speakers, and it's quite obvious that the government has got this very high on their agenda. We've also been part of a consultation group with His Majesty's government to talk about guardrails for the ethical use of AI. So there is a groundswell of activity to get this right. But to do it on a global basis, if you look at climate change, for example, for 50 years, we've had the world's scientists presenting data-led proof that we've got to take global action to combat climate change. And we've kind of not done everything we need to do. And there's no global agreement about emissions. There's no global agreement on moving towards zero carbon emission energy policies and so on. So I think trying to do these things on a global scale is incredibly difficult, because it's all very well for us in the West to say, oh, we need to do X, Y, Z. But if you're an emerging nation or you've got different societal challenges, your perspective on something like the use of AI for, let's say, food distribution could be extremely different to what we have in the West. So I think globally it's very, very difficult to get this right. And I think history tells us that we're not very good at agreeing things on a global basis. The very fact you've got global resolution on peace one day, institutionalized day of peace on the 21st of September, to me is nothing short of a miracle. But it's not something we tend to be terribly good at. So I think the push for getting the balance right between innovation and exploitation, that kind of debate, we've got to do that locally. We've got to do it within our own regulatory frameworks. And I think the responsibility comes down to individuals, people like you and I. It comes down to our educational institutions, and it also comes down to policy. And I don't think you can achieve any sort of acceptable agreement about the ethical and safe implementation of AI without those three things: individual responsibility, education, and policy. So it's a huge challenge, Jeremy. You're absolutely right. The good news is that wherever you look in the world, the regulations that are being discussed, debated, and implemented, you've kind of got a very common theme within those regulatory frameworks. For example, AI must do no harm. That's common throughout. So I think the movement generally is very good. The balance between innovation and regulation, there's always going to be a tension there. On one end of the spectrum, you want to explore as much as possible and be creative and innovative, and that way you find innovations that have a big payoff. But at the same time, you want to be exploiting what is known, what is safe, and what is delivering. And it's getting the balance between those two right. I think at the moment, we're very much in the explore stage. Everyone's charging off, building all kinds of stuff. And it's a little bit unregulated. And there are challenges with that. But I think it will mature into a more regulated, conformist environment that we all work within. There's always going to be outliers. There's always going to be the pirates in the sea doing weird and wacky stuff that is not necessarily within a regulatory compliance framework. But I think at the moment, like I said earlier, it's a bit Wild West right now, but it is changing and maturing.
Matt, much of your work has involved building systems that people rely on at scale. So in a world where AI can increasingly distort reality, how do we protect the integrity of information and maintain trust in the systems that underpin society?
It's a huge question. And yes, we are reliant as a society in the UK, across Europe, Americas, pretty much everywhere, on systems to support our daily lives. There's no question of it. And I don't think people quite realise just how embedded artificial intelligence is in our way of life in terms of technology. It's everywhere, and it's part of the matrix of our modern technological society. The big difference now is, of course, and we've seen with things like deepfake and so on, you can use AI to generate information that's completely untrue, images, narrative, dialogue. It's very simple to do. Anybody can do it, and it is a problem. So I think there's a number of issues there. So on your last question, we talked about regulation. regulation. I think a regulation framework for the use of media is really important, and I know a lot of people are working to try and achieve that. But establishing trust, this is going to sound very at odds with the whole AI piece, and that is, I think we're going to move towards far more intimate human contact when it comes to delivering services to customers, to users of our systems. So, for example, chatbots, everyone hates them. It's a real problem, particularly now because AI has made it such that you don't actually know whether you're talking to a bot or a real person. And I think we will move away from that to a far more human-centric model when it comes to interface. Now, that's fine when you're talking about things like accessing your banking information or whatever it may be. But things like social media, we're not going to see a situation where we can identify the false from the true. And I don't think that platforms like Facebook and X and so on are really making a big effort to identify fake information. But the challenge for me is if you've got someone, a real person, telling lies on Facebook, how is that different to an AI making stuff up? It's kind of no different. And, as human beings, we've got to be selective about what we believe, and we've got to, if someone has an opinion that we're interested in, we've got to research, we've got to read, we've got to intellectually engage with that conversation, with that narrative. That's the only way of finding out, what is true or not. And I think everyone's going to be blaming AI for fictitious information. But, there are certain presidents of certain large countries around the world that are extremely good at misinformation. And we use our intellect to dial that out, to really get to the truth behind these things. So I think trying to find a technology solution for misinformation is going to be extremely difficult. And really, I'm hoping what it means is that we start relying on people a lot more than systems to do that intimate interface with systems that we need. I don't want to be served at a restaurant by a robot. I want to be served by a sommelier that knows what they're talking about. Do you see what I mean? It's that personal touch, I think, will become a lot more important.
On the other side of the risk, there is, of course, Matt, extraordinary potential. Where do you see AI becoming real infrastructure for good, whether in economic inclusion, access, or stability? And where are you already seeing that shift happen in practice?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I did allude to this earlier, is that as part of our research to stay ahead of what's happening with technology, we're very aware of what is going on in the world. And I have to say, there are countless great examples of how technology is being used to improve the human condition, to protect our wild places, to protect our food systems, our security systems, etc. There is a load of good work being done out there. And it's a growing movement, and one of the places where there's huge investment is Middle East. Likewise, across Europe, the amount of money that's been invested in worthwhile projects is considerable. So I think there is fantastic energy behind tech for good when it comes to AI. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, of course, we're seeing weaponization of AI with things like, our drones and remotely piloted vehicles and all this kind of stuff, autonomous combat frames and all this kind of stuff. And I do think, I find it really revolting, if I can say this, to see on LinkedIn when you have weapons companies exhibiting their latest AI kill bot or whatever. I think it's disgusting. And I would never sign up to it. And we as a business won't work on those sort of programs. But I find it really interesting that we celebrate the weaponization aspects of this at the same time that we're celebrating the positive aspects of it. And I just wonder, as human beings, if we haven't got a dial set right. We all know that war and destruction and domestic violence, all of these things create fear in the world. They move against peace, and they prevent us moving forward as a species. And yet, are we really doing anything to, stop these things from from happening. I'm probably rambling a bit, but I think the messaging is so important. And what I would like to see personally is more platforms, more amplifications of the great work that AI is doing. And these new technologies are achieving remarkable things, but it's a lot harder to find than the negatives. But maybe that's just the way we are as a species. We like to hear about, the bad things. It's kind of like when people slow down past a road accident, they want to see, what's actually going on. Maybe it's that. I don't know, Jeremy. You've got a better perspective on this than me, but I think overall it's very, very positive indeed. There are tweaks we need to make. As I said earlier, we've got to make sure that big corporations don't control the narrative entirely. It's not about shareholder primacy. There's a lot of work to be done, and I think the reality is that we've hit these challenges before as a species many, many, many times over. The difference is this is happening so quickly, and society therefore needs to adapt a lot quicker than we've ever done before. But if you think about it, we have the tools for that. 100 years ago, to get the message to 100 million people would have taken 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, who knows. Now we can do it in a single click. So we've got the tools to create the sort of global cooperation that you alluded to earlier. It's just an act of will. And we all need to stand up. And again, I don't want to really labour this point, but you do hear a lot of people saying, the government should do this, the government should do that, and create this regulation, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't just sit with the government. It sits with every single one of us. An example would be, if as an individual you consume AI-generated content that is fictitious and you find it interesting, amusing or funny, or you share it, you are adding to that misinformation movement. So I would say resist it, be genuine, be authentic, look for the truth, use your intellect, etc., and join the narrative.
Thank you, Matt. Look, as someone who has shaped technology at scale, what responsibility do founders, leaders, and institutions carry in this moment? And what gives you confidence that we can still steer this in a direction that genuinely benefits humanity?
My personal view, for what it's worth, is that founders like myself, across all sizes of organisations and institutions, we carry enormous responsibility. And the way that responsibility plays out, I think, is that it's up to us to find purpose within the organisation. And I think your friend, Paul Polman, is very good with this. Simon Sinek is very good with this. You've got to find your why, your ikigai, your purpose within the business. And that purpose needs to be for good intent. So what I'm saying is, if as a founder, your only focus, your primary focus is shareholder dividends or profit or whatever, you're not going to run a business that really maps onto what we need as a society, which is that purpose-driven technology for good mantra, which I keep going on about. So I think founders' responsibility is based in finding that purpose and using AI to drive that purpose forward. It's also, I think with founders, it's about communicating the right message to the staff, to suppliers, to customers, and the communities that we rely on in order to thrive. So, for example, if we feel that a supplier is using technology in a way that doesn't map onto our principles, we need to call that out. And not call it out necessarily in a punitive way, but in a way to say, come on, guys, there are better ways of doing whatever it is that we're trying to do here. And I think if everyone is of that mindset, then we'd be working in a very pleasant environment, a lot of collaboration, and a lot of our issues and challenges would go away. So I think purpose is huge, communication is huge, and there's no doubt about it that access to cheap, accessible artificial intelligence technologies is probably the biggest step forward in the human condition since the Industrial Revolution. It is absolutely massive, and we will see a revolution in medicine, in energy and food security, and so on and so on. Medicine, I think, is a huge one, because the right use of AI, and especially when quantum computing comes along, we could see diseases that are appalling for human beings, completely eradicated. It's more than possible. So I think it's having purpose, it's having great communication and having the right goals for your technology. I think those are the responsibilities that we carry. And as founders, regardless of the size of your organization, we all have a voice. And I think contributing to that positive narrative is absolutely vital. The only other thing I'd add to that is I don't think organizations like ours, software businesses and technologies, I don't think we do enough with the education sector to inform, as you would say, to educate, to inform and to inspire young people to embrace technology for good and realize the power of it. We all want our lives to be better. So that's the only thing we should be using technology for, to improve our lives and the lives of our colleagues, our brothers and sisters across the world.
Matt, thank you so much for today. Thank you for supporting Peace One Day for a long time. Thank you for enabling AI to Peace to take place. Good luck, mate.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure, Jeremy. I hope it all goes well for you.
Alistair Moore, welcome to AI to Peace.
Hello, great. Thank you for having me.
So, Alistair, you've been at the forefront of AI's development and its innovation. Could you share a little bit about your journey and how your perspective has evolved on the role AI might play in shaping society and ultimately supporting peace?
So I've been involved since about 1999. I started studying what we now call AI at university, originally in a physics department, then in a maths department, then in a philosophy department, then in a computing department. So I've worked my way through various different views of the subject. I think the last 10 years is the sort of development has been spectacular in the power of these machines. And so I think whereas before it was always likely that we would, it would get utilized in society at some point at scale, but that time is now. And so I think it's a very interesting and challenging time to be thinking about how these systems should diffuse into the economy.
So, Alistair, from your vantage point, I mean, that's 27 years. You and I started working on something at the same time. I launched Peace One Day in 1999. So that's a long period of time that you've been looking really closely at the world of AI. So from your vantage point, what concerns you most about the risks AI presents, particularly in relation to misinformation, polarization, and the potential for instability or conflict?
These issues, they start before AI became so useful and so powerful. If you look at social media, we don't need, AI or a general intelligence to know that we have lots of problems with regulating those types of behaviors that you've just said, misinformation or polarization. And, materially in the 15 years since we discovered this idea of, for example, filter bubbles, we have made very little to no progress on dealing with those issues. And AI and the recent developments in AI are going to amplify those problems.
So, this phrase, no policy, no peace, there's a growing sense that without meaningful policy and cooperation, AI could deepen instability rather than reduce it. So how do you see the role of policy evolving? And do you feel we're moving quickly enough to safeguard people?
I think these are systems that will have to be regulated, but just because they're so powerful. I think that the regulatory landscape is actually very difficult, deciding how and where and when the regulation should apply. I mean, I think that's less controversial in the sort of defense or weaponization space than it is for other aspects of society. But the main problem that you have is that these machines are in principle, very powerful decision-making machines. And so they will be used for allocating resource, for making decisions about the way people live their lives, for the types of services they get access to, and so on and so forth. And at the more controversial, more extreme ends of that spectrum, they're very difficult social economic issues that need to be teased out.
So, Alistair, AI is increasingly capable of distorting reality at scale. How do we protect truth and maintain trust when the line between real and fabricated content is becoming harder to detect?
I think it's already impossible to detect in lots of cases. Think about deep fakes or synthetic media. It's almost impossible for an uneducated eye to determine the difference now, let alone worry about how you might misinterpret something that's presented to you. So I think we're at the very early stages of trying to figure out how you might regulate this. You're going to have to understand provenance. You're going to have to understand how information has been audited. Again, to a certain extent, these are old issues that we have to revisit, probably with a stronger technical solution. So we understand bias, we understand propaganda, we understand the idea that you can twist or bias a message specifically for one audience versus another. What we don't have at the moment are good systems for implementing and controlling those issues. And if it's too centralized, the solution, then you end up with the same sort of problems that you would get from any sort of central control. And so we need to have a public debate urgently about how we do enforce these types of things. It's clear the sorts of, at least in this part of the world, it's clear the sorts of values we would like to codify in these systems when it comes to what truth is. But the technical solution for being able to do it and the solutions for being able to regulate it at scale are underdeveloped.
Incredible that you've been working in this world for 27 years when most of us feel like it's just begun. And so, what do you think's not understood? What sort of frustrates you about when people talk about AI? I mean, there must be things that you're like, I wish everybody just understood this.
I mean, we should say 27 years is not a long time in the context of the subject, right? We have been building and investigating and exploring these types of systems since the sort of 1940s. So in some sense, it's not a new technology. It's quite an old technology where we have gone through phases of discovering how to build these systems and how to make them work. I think that at the moment, the thing that is underappreciated and is not discussed in public is just the rate of change of performance. We're building machines that, I'm going to use IQ as a proxy. I'm not suggesting IQ is a good way of measuring human intelligence, let alone machine intelligence. But we were building machines with an IQ of sort of 40 in 2019, 2020, and maybe 80 to 100 in 23, and maybe 120 in 24, and 150 in 25. So you've gone from like the lowest end of the population in terms of capability to certain cases in the highest end of the population. You've got Fields Medal winner mathematicians now using AI to generate mathematical proofs. And so to go through that whole human cognitive spectrum, to the extent that we have in 5 years is remarkable.
Alistair, in relation to what you've been saying, I've seen all of this information about Anthropic and the Pentagon and how the AI can be used and not used. What's happening there? Could you explain in a bit more detail to those who might not have full knowledge?
So this comes down to, the knotty decision we discussed earlier, which is like, where and when can the machine help make a decision, and should it be able to make a decision on its own? I guess in this scenario, you've got a state or a government, the US government in this case, suggesting that it should have final say on where and when the AI is used. And perhaps if that's the locus of democratic control, that's not an unreasonable request either. But the request is that, for example, the AI can be used to surveil citizens. And the request is that the AI can be used to make a a kill decision on the battlefield. And so where the balance of power lies between companies, private sector, supply chain, decision processes in the body politic, decision processes in departments of government that have specialist functions, this has gone from a sort of sci-fi or academic discussion to the one that is affecting the real world within the space of a couple of years.
So on the other side of this, there is enormous potential. What excites you most about AI's ability to contribute to a more peaceful and sustainable world? And where are you already seeing that in action?
There's a dystopian version of this, and there is a utopian version of this, and we probably end up somewhere in the middle. But the point where a citizen can get access to, essentially free cognitive services. So I can have instant medical expertise on tap, or I can have instant legal expertise on tap. I can have support for making decisions in my life. I can be informed. I can have help. Again, as we move from, we'll very quickly move from digital intelligence to physical intelligence. So, there will be robots that can help care for you, or a help assistant in a domestic setting, and so on and so forth. So we should go into this thinking, and I think probably the public discourse doesn't emphasize the potential benefits as in the way that it probably should. It's very easy to talk about the scary narrative. But on the other side of this, having free intelligence or abundant intelligence or the hope is it would massively transform our social setting, our economic setting in terms of abundance.
Very true. So as the technology accelerates, what responsibility do leaders, companies, and individuals carry in shaping it? And what gives you hope that we can guide AI in a direction that genuinely benefits humanity?
So at the moment, I think it's moving, the frontier technology is moving so quickly. The best thing that anyone can do, let alone leaders, is educate yourself. I think you have to be trialing and testing and experimenting and using these things. You have to have some first-hand or lived experience of what they can and can't do. And the technology or the science of this is very underdeveloped in lots of ways. So that the engineering or the craft of building these systems is such that we don't know exactly how they'll behave, or what they will be good at, or what they would be bad at. And so I think there's two things. One is to experiment and educate yourself on what they can and can't do in the setting in which you find yourself. And then the second is to go into that with a degree of skepticism as well, which is you need to start to develop capabilities or awareness for how this system might interact with you, right? How it will change the way you think, or goes back to your point earlier about controlling narratives and polarization and so on and so forth. They're incredibly powerful tools, and so I think as a society, the best thing we can do now is start to have an open dialogue and start to build opinions. I think the other thing is not coming to it. The development has caught a lot of people by surprise. And so I think you have to come to it with not too much of a closed mindset of it's like this, or it's like that, or it will do this, or it can't do that. We just don't know is the reality in lots of scenarios at the moment. So that the faster people can build their own opinion on aspects of this, I think the better the discussion and the dialogue and how we deal with the change that this will undoubtedly bring.
Alistair, thanks a lot for participating in AI to Peace. We wish you the very best. If people want to find out more about your journey and your work, where would they go?
You can find me on various sorts of social media. I am still based at UCL. I teach AI strategy in the School of Management at University College London. So you can find me there as well.
Fantastic. Good luck with your work.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Steve Harding, welcome to AI to Peace.
Hey, Jeremy, great to see you again.
Listen, Steve, the first question I want to ask you is you've had a highly successful career in software and the broader tech world. And through that, you've developed a deep understanding of AI. Could you share a little bit about your journey and how your perspective has evolved on the role AI might play in shaping society and ultimately peace?
Yeah, look, I feel very fortunate, Jeremy. I started my career actually in 1988, training to be a chartered accountant. And I followed that path for 7 years before I moved into sales. And I spent all of the time since then, so pretty much since 1995, in technology sales. And of course, technology, having a kind of ringside seat in the evolution of technology over a quarter of a century has just been fascinating for me. And I think the reality is that, the career I've had has not been a marketing story. It's kind of really played out in real time, how technology is adopted, where resistance occurs in terms of, when technology isn't adopted, and then also kind of what are the unintended consequences of technology that you perhaps don't expect going into a transformation program. And then as I've gotten older, I think more about how technology operates at scale, perhaps not just in terms of its impact on one company, but how does it impact entire societies or governments? And like, how do you think about that on a kind of geopolitical level? And so I think now more than ever with AI, there is the capability to create change that's both positive, but perhaps also negative. And that needs to be very, very carefully managed by all of the stakeholders that occur within not just technology, but within policymakers and within governments and within society more broadly.
Thank you, Steve. I want to next ask you, from your vantage point, what concerns you most about the risk AI presents, particularly in relation to misinformation, polarization, and the potential for instability or conflict?
Yeah, for me, I think like the most immediate consideration, let's call it a consideration instead of fear, is not really the sci-fi scenario that often gets kind of played out in literature. In some ways, it's more mundane and perhaps even more dangerous than that. And it's the industrialization of doubt. And AI makes it trivially cheap to produce convincing misinformation pretty much at scale and at a speed that human fact-checking just can't keep pace with. Funnily enough, in the business that I'm in at the moment, we talk about how do we listen to signals and how do we distinguish the signals from the noise. And I think one of the risks with AI is that it can create noise at colossal scale, and that can flood the public with social discourse if we're not careful. And that can be very polarizing. And that then creates social problems. And so I think that's my biggest concern is the tools can destabilize faster than we can rebuild the trust. And I think, as we all know, you earn trust in drops and you lose it in buckets. And at a societal level, I think that's the thing that causes me the most concern.
Thank you, Steve. Look, there's a growing sense that without meaningful policy and cooperation, AI could deepen instability rather than reduce it. How do you see the role of policy evolving, and do you feel we're moving quickly enough to safeguard people?
Look, I think this is in some ways the most pertinent question to this whole discussion. Funnily enough, in my day job, I'm the executive sponsor for our ESG program. And, when I think about some of the frameworks that govern ESG, like the GRI framework or the CSRD frameworks, I think it's true. I think it's true that they don't really keep pace with the speed of change at an organizational level, let alone at a kind of geopolitical or government level. And so I think my honest view, as we think about regulation and policy as it comes to AI, I think the short answer is no, we're not moving fast enough. And in some ways, it's not surprising because the policies always tend to lag the technology. And the technology is moving so fast that the policymakers literally cannot keep up with it. And so I think I've heard a few commentators talk about, the potential need for a policy that's similar in design to the kind of nuclear non-proliferation legislation, where, we get more of a kind of global umbrella approach to nuclear disarmament. I know that also hasn't been perfect, right? But and particularly now it feels very precarious. But what is the equivalent of that in AI that allows us to really kind of lock down the very, very dangerous stuff that can create this social disorder that we described earlier on? And I think the private sector's got a big role in this, but it's not just company themselves. It's the policymakers, it's the umbrella organizations, and of course, it's the governments. I think more than ever, though, international cohesion is going to be imperative for AI. Like, this isn't really something that you can do in isolation. It's great that the EU are forging their own way, but that really needs to be harmonized with what other major economics and non-major economic centers are doing too. So there really needs to be some kind of overall umbrella governance. I think some of the big large language model vendors are doing quite a good job at setting the standard. I think there's one in particular that have really set themselves out to be the de facto standard for responsible AI. I won't mention them by name, but I think those types of organizations definitely need to be encouraged.
Yeah, completely agree, Steve. On the other side of this, though, there is enormous potential. What excites you most about AI's ability to contribute to a more peaceful and sustainable world? And where are you already seeing that in action?
I'm an eternal optimist. And the vantage point that I articulated at the very beginning of this interview, which is one of watching technology evolve and generally be good for society and good for progress, human progress. I have to remain optimistic that AI is eventually going to find its path towards positive outcomes. I think AI needs to just be deployed well across all of these international boundaries. And I think it offers the potential to really democratize capability. If you've got PhD intelligence in your pocket and you can harness it at ease and at scale, then that has the potential to lift everybody in society to an equal standard. The question is, how can we provide access to everybody so that everybody can enjoy it, so that we don't end up with this kind of social polarization that we have actually seen with other technologies. But the fact that everybody has now got PhD standard education literally in their pocket as an advisor, that's really, really well trained and really, really careful around concepts like bias and moral guidance and ethics and fairness and equity. I think the large language models, for now at least, are working pretty hard to make sure that they adhere to those standards, and providing that access to everybody in 193 countries across the world has the real potential to democratize the power that AI can bring. I think that has to be the thing that is going to be the enduring legacy, the enduring positive legacy of AI.
Yeah, that's very exciting, Steve. I completely agree with you. It's this side of it, the positive side of it, of course, is extremely exciting, and you've articulated that extremely well. So as this technology accelerates, what responsibility do leaders, companies, and individuals carry in shaping it? And what gives you hope that we can guide AI in a direction that genuinely benefits humanity?
That's a great question. I often think about my daughters when I answer a question like that. I've got a 20-year-old and a 21-year-old, two daughters, both at university, both willful, clever, kind-hearted, ambitious young people entering, frankly, a somewhat precarious labor market, because we really don't know what AI is going to do for work and creativity. But I think that we've alluded to it before, governmental leaders, business leaders, organizational leaders we all need to lean in and share the responsibility of making sure that we deliver AI at scale in a way that is beneficial to everybody. I remember reading a book that was on the topic of AI, and the opening paragraph postulated that we're all going to be living in the forest. And the question was, are we living in the forest because we're hiding from the machines? Or are we living in the forest because we're relaxing because the machines are doing our work? I think that's a little bit sci-fi, but I think it's also true that there always needs to be a human in the loop with AI. That's the really powerful intersection, is how do you get the machines to do the mundane whilst preserving the actions of the human so that they can do the things that are naturally creative, naturally relationship-based, naturally human, and then create an environment which is truly symbiotic. And I think the policymakers have a role to play in that. I think business leaders have a role to play in that. I think the NGOs have a role to play in that. And I also think the governments do too. If we work together, we're going to nail it. If we don't, then, we need to be careful.
Steve Harding, thank you for your support, and we wish you the very best on your journey. Thanks, Steve.
Take care. It's always a pleasure.
Dan Wagner of Resolve, welcome to #AI to Peace.
Thank you, Jeremy. Lovely to be here.
So look, Dan, you've built and led companies at the forefront of technology for decades, long before AI became a part of the mainstream conversation. Could you take us through your journey and how your perspective has evolved on the role AI might play now in shaping society and ultimately peace?
Well, yeah, so I've been involved in technology now for over 40 years. I set up my first company in 1984, and we were the pioneer in online information. We were the first to digitize newspapers, trade journals, and periodicals and make them available online for interrogation. And to put it into context, this was 5 years before Tim Berners-Lee presented the concept of the World Wide Web at CERN, and eight years before we started using www. It was 10 years or 11 years before Amazon opened its doors. So we were, really a pioneer. And as a result of that, of being the first, we had to develop our own search technologies. We had to develop our own e-commerce technologies, and we had to build our own data centers. That business went on to become the world leader in online information over the next 16 years. And by the time I sold it to Thomson Reuters in 2000, we were operating in 192 countries. We had 3 of the largest data centers on the planet in Palo Alto, Bern, Switzerland, and Singapore. And we were the number one market leader for providing information to pretty much everybody at that time. And so during that period, of course, I had to develop search technology so that we could interrogate this vast data set that kept growing, every year. And I worked with some of the luminaries of search, Professor Stephen Robertson, who worked for me for a couple of years before being poached by Bill Gates to set up Bing, and Dr. Martin Porter, who famously developed the Porter-Stemming algorithm, which is the foundation of AI, in that the Porter-Stemming algorithm used the stem of a word. So if you put in DANC, it would reference a dictionary to think, oh, you might be typing dancer or dancing or dance hall. And that became the foundation of predictive typing, but it's also the foundation fundamentally of generative AI, which is computers guessing the word and the next word and the next word to create a sentence, then create a paragraph. And it's all doing that based upon the ingested content it has. So really, I was at the foundation of Gen AI from the 90s, really, when we started understanding that computers can predict things for us. And in predicting things, ultimately, that could lead to being able to have a conversation, or what appears to be a conversation.
Thank you, Dan. So from your vantage point as a technologist and entrepreneur, what concerns you most about the systemic risk AI presents, particularly in relation to misinformation, polarization, and the potential for destabilization at scale?
Look, I think as with all technologies, bad actors can leverage that technology in ways that are, beneficial to those individuals, but also damaging to other individuals and damaging to the world. And when technologies like this come about, it is the responsibility of the good actors to ensure that the bad actors don't have the power of it overtly or be able to use that power overtly to the detriment of others. And this is the case with all technology advancement. I mean, it's part of the guardrails you put around the utilization of advanced technology. And so there's no difference here. But I am concerned more generally because of the way in which computers are starting to behave, in that they are appearing to make up their own minds about things. I think that's a greater and more worrying trend.
So there's a growing sense on that note that without coordinated policy, no AI policy, no peace, and global cooperation, AI could amplify instability rather than reduce it. How do you see the balance between innovation and regulation? And do you feel we're moving fast enough to put meaningful safeguards in place?
I don't think we're moving fast enough to put meaningful safeguards in place, unfortunately. I do think that there is a rush for profit that is driving, and a rush for control that is driving both governments and companies to leverage the technology and push the boundaries of it as fast as possible to gain a superiority or a competitive advantage globally, which is what they will do as a result of that, at the expense of caution.
Very interesting. So look, Dan, much of your career has involved building systems people rely on at scale. You just informed us of that. In a world where AI can increasingly distort reality, how do we protect the integrity of the information and rebuild trust in the systems that underpin society?
That's a very difficult question to answer. The reality is that these models are making mistakes. We call it hallucinations. It's one of the things that Resolve, with the name Resolve, is all about, solving the problem of hallucinations. Now, hallucinations is not some hippie, doing drugs. It's the problem. It is the answer to a question that you give ChatGPT or Gemini or Anthropic or one of the generalist AI engines that answers it in a very intelligent way, but is actually factually incorrect or even misleading. And when you have a situation where authority gives the perception of accuracy, you end up with the vast majority of the population taking decisions based on inaccurate information or misleading information, and that's where things start to break down. So I think that we have a fundamental problem in that the technology isn't robust and safe, in that it doesn't answer correctly. And you must have come across this yourself. I'd like to go on holiday to the coast of Italy. Can you recommend some hotels? Yes, there's a lovely hotel in Marbella. No, that's not in Italy. Oh, sorry. Here's some hotels in Italy. There is this kind of, a gentle management between a consumer and a generative AI assistant, where the consumer is the oversight, or meant to be. But unfortunately, a large proportion of the population don't know the difference between Marbella and the coast of Italy. And so you have a lot of things which are answered, and people take that as accurate. And this becomes a bigger problem, because it's not an easy problem to solve, in that probabilistic algorithms, which is the foundation of Gen AI, meaning it's guessing words and it's guessing the sentence and then guessing the paragraph with the perception of a conversation, is inherently going to make mistakes, because probability makes mistakes. I'll give you a very simple example. 2 apples and 2 apples in pure maths is 4 apples. But 2 apples and 2 apples in probabilistic algorithms is potentially water, because all 4 apples are mainly made up of water. So when you have this, it's right, but it's wrong, and so this is the gray area of generative AI that can create fundamental misleading information for everybody. This is not the bad actors taking advantage of it. This is just fundamentally, it's an unreliable, at 100% reliable, technology to leverage on. And that's the biggest issue here.
Dan, on the other side of the risk, there's extraordinary potential, and you're all about hope, and you're an optimist. You're an incredible individual. I've known you for years, and I thank you. Actually, take this moment to thank you for all of your support. But where do you see AI becoming real infrastructure for good, whether in economics or inclusion, access or stability? Where are you already seeing that shift happen in practice?
Well, I don't. I'm sorry to say, I see it as a fantastic way to improve productivity, because I think that all of us who have used these solutions recognize that they help accelerate our ability to get things done in the workplace and in our own lives, right? When we are finding out about things or doing research or wanting to, whatever it happens to be, right? Those capabilities are enhancing to our ability to get things done. But beyond that, in terms of how is it improving mankind, I'm not sure that there are many good examples of that. I think that broader, bigger picture, which is very much the foundation of your life's work, is not really in scope. Everybody behind what's going on in this revolution are looking to leverage people's lazy approach to life, their convenience. And AI can do that, certainly. It can make things easier for people, then get things done faster. And of course, there are lots of examples of its capabilities in robotics and in other service type functions that will also be very helpful to our quality of life.
As someone who has shaped technology, as you said, you were there almost before anybody else at a massive scale. What responsibility do founders, leaders and institutions carry right now? And what gives you confidence that we can still steer this moment in a direction that genuinely could benefit humanity?
Well, I think that there is, the first thing is, you can actually ask the AI that question yourself. Given that it is, the most sophisticated resource of intelligence of this planet today, Gemini and ChatGPT and X are likely it, right? They've read everything, good and bad. They have analyzed everything and are able to give you very good insight. Okay, so I would actually ask AI that question. I know it's kind of bizarre, but I think that and put it in place. What do we need to put in place? I think that would be quite an interesting exercise that you should probably do immediately after this call. And I might do it myself. I think that the problem is that the people behind these companies, and I'm involved in a very tight vertical. We're just trying to use AI to help e-commerce and retail serve customers better. So it's a very, very tight vertical swim lane that I'm operating in. But in the much broader picture of the utilization of AI, the big organizations who are involved in it are just trying to be the fountain of all knowledge. And in being the fountain of all knowledge, with the caveat that it makes mistakes, it is a commercial proposition. It's got nothing to do with the planet. It's got nothing to do with peace. It's got nothing to do with anything other than making money. And I'm sorry to say, and competitive advantage for governments, because the government that has that intelligence available to it is going to be better than another government that doesn't. So that's the world we're in right now. That's the race that's taking place. And I think that there is a role to play for AI to help guide us in the other areas, because it can give us that guidance.
Dan Wagner of Resolve, thank you so much for your participation in AI to Peace, and good luck on your journey.
Thanks so much.